I've worked as a sheriff's deputy most of my life, and people think the job is nothing but arrests, traffic stops, and paperwork. But the truth is, some nights are quiet. Too quiet. That's when your mind starts to wander. That's when the world feels a little different. For me, the worst of those nights were always the graveyard shifts. I mean that literally. Our county has a cemetery that goes back over 100 years. Old wrought iron gates, moss on the stones, trees that lean in over the gravel road like crooked hands. I drove past it 1,000 times. I hated it every single time. The first night I saw her, the fog was so thick it looked like smoke rolling low over the ground. The kind of fog that makes the beam of your headlights stretch only a few feet ahead before vanishing into nothing. I was crawling along the road, windows cracked, radio low. It was late, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. The whole town was asleep. Just me, my cruiser, and the empty roads. When I came up on the cemetery, I noticed a figure standing near the gates. A woman. At first, I thought maybe she was drunk or in trouble. She wore a long white dress that clung against her in the damp air. Her hair was dark, hanging in tangled strands down her shoulders. She wasn't moving. Just standing there, facing the gate like she was waiting for someone to unlock it. I slowed the cruiser, squinting through the fog. My stomach sank. I knew right away something wasn't right. Nobody in their right mind stands at the cemetery gates at 2 in the morning. I rolled down the passenger window a little further. "Ma'am?" I called out. My voice sounded too loud in the fog, like it got swallowed before it could travel far. She didn't turn, didn't even flinch. I put the cruiser in park, stepped out, and the cold hit me. The air smelled like wet leaves and rust. My boots crunched on gravel as I approached. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The closer I got, the stranger it seemed. She wasn't pressed up against the gate. She was just standing a few feet back from it, staring at the iron bars. The white dress she wore looked old, like something from a thrift store, the fabric thin and fraying at the edges. When I was maybe 10 feet away, I stopped. Some gut instinct told me not to get closer. It wasn't fear exactly. More like I was intruding on something I didn't understand. Her head turned, finally, just slightly, as though she had noticed me. I expected to see her face, maybe catch a whiff of alcohol, anything human. Instead, her skin was pale in the glow of the cruiser's headlights, and her eyes, I swear they looked gray, like cloudy glass. Not blind, not lifeless, but empty. I froze. My throat went dry. "Do you need help?" I asked again, quieter this time. She didn't answer. She just turned back toward the gate like I wasn't even there. I reached for my radio, thumb hovering over the button. What would I even say? "Dispatch, I've got a strange woman staring at the cemetery gates." They'd think I was losing it. When I glanced back at her, she was gone. Not walking away, not slipping into the trees. Just gone. The space by the gate was empty. Only fog curling against the iron bars. My heart hammered. I backed up slowly toward the cruiser, every nerve in me telling me to get back inside. I shut the door, locked it without thinking, and just sat there with the engine running, staring at the gate through the windshield. I stayed there for a good 10 minutes, waiting for her to appear again. Nothing. Just fog and silence. Eventually, I drove off, telling myself I must have been tired. Maybe my eyes played tricks on me. That was the easy answer, and I clung to it. But the next night, she was there again. Same place. Same white dress. Same stillness. This time, I didn't even get out of the cruiser. I slowed, kept the headlights on her, and just watched. She didn't move. Didn't look at me. Didn't even breathe. As far as I could tell, I wanted to call it in. I really did. But something in my gut told me not to. Not because I was scared of looking foolish, but because I had the sick feeling that bringing someone else here would make it worse. Like it was mine to deal with and mine alone. That shift, I circled back 3 different times, and each time she was there. Same stance. Same silent guard at the gate. By the 3rd night, it became a routine. I'd pass the cemetery, see her standing there, and try to ignore the knot in my stomach. I told myself not to look too long. Not to slow down, just keep driving. But every time, my eyes found her. And every time I felt that same cold press down on me, like stepping into water that's far too deep. It started messing with my sleep. When I got home in the mornings, I'd lay in bed and close my eyes only to see her face again. those pale, empty eyes turned just slightly toward me. Not accusing, not pleading, just watching. A week into this, I finally snapped. I couldn't keep pretending it wasn't happening. I needed to confront it. That night, I parked the cruiser right in front of the gate, headlights on high. I got out, flashlight in hand, and marched straight toward her. "All right," I said under my breath. "You're gonna tell me who you are." The fog swirled, the iron bars looming in front of me, and she was there, as always, only a few feet back from the gate, her head tilted as though she'd been expecting me. I shined the flashlight directly on her, and that's when I realized something. That made my blood run cold. Her feet weren't touching the ground, not by much, just a few inches, but enough. Enough that the hem of her white dress swayed slightly in the still air. Enough that the gravel beneath her remained undisturbed. I staggered back, the light shaking in my hand. "Jesus Christ," I muttered. Her lips parted then, but no sound came out. Not even a whisper. Just the faintest movement, like she was trying to form a word but couldn't. My whole body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. My boots felt rooted to the spot, like if I turned away, something worse would happen. She raised her hand, slow, deliberate, and pressed it against the iron bars of the gate. Not on my side, not reaching for me, just holding it there as though testing the strength of the metal. The sound that followed still haunts me. A groan, low and deep, like iron bending under pressure, except the gate didn't move. It was just sound. Her eyes flicked toward me once more, then back to the gate, and just like before, she was gone. No fade. No step into the fog. Just gone. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the gravel. My heart slammed so hard I thought it might give out. I bolted for the cruiser, slammed the door shut, and floored it out of there, tires spitting rocks. The whole drive back, my hands shook so bad I could barely grip the wheel. I didn't even bother with the radio. Didn't bother trying to calm myself down. I just drove until the cemetery was far behind me, until the fog lifted and the first pale gray of dawn touched the horizon. But even then, even as daylight crept back over the fields and trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't just seen something strange. I had interrupted something, and whatever that woman was doing at that gate, she wasn't waiting to be let in. She was making sure something else stayed locked inside. I tried to put that night behind me. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, the tricks of fog and headlights. That's what I clung to. But the problem was, she didn't stop appearing. Every night I worked that route, she was there. Same dress, same stillness, same hand brushing against the old iron gate as if it meant something. By the second week, I didn't even try to approach anymore. I'd pass by in silence, eyes locked straight ahead, refusing to give her more of me than she already had, but she stayed in my head. When I ate, when I slept, even when I was trying to talk to my wife over breakfast, that pale skin, those eyes, the way her lips moved without sound, it was eating me alive. One afternoon, after I finally crawled out of bed from a graveyard shift, I sat in my kitchen staring at my coffee, and I realized something. I couldn't just keep ignoring this. If I wanted it to stop haunting me, I had to know who she was. That's what pushed me to the records. Our county keeps boxes upon boxes of old files in the back of the sheriff's office. Most of them are unsorted, crammed with dust, yellowed pages, photographs curling at the edges, missing persons reports, cold cases, unsolved deaths. The kind of paperwork nobody ever looks at once the trail goes cold. I waited until the station was quiet, the evening shift barely rolling in, then I slipped back there with an old desk lamp buzzing overhead. I didn't even know where to start. All I had was the image in my head, a woman in white, long dark hair, pale as bone. That was it. So I started combing. I went through decades worth of files, from the 70s, the 60s, back even further. So many faces, so many names. People who left for work and never came back. Kids who vanished on their way to school. A hitchhiker nobody claimed. But then, one photo stopped me cold. It was paper-clipped to a report from 1982. A woman, maybe late 20s, dark hair parted down the middle. Black and white picture, washed out and grainy, but even then, my heart stuttered. The eyes, that was the first thing. Her eyes were pale, washed out even in the photograph, as if the camera had stolen the light from them, just like the ones staring at me through the fog. The report said her name was Marjorie Klein, last seen walking home after a late shift at a diner just outside town. White dress. Witnesses said she cut across the cemetery road to get back to her neighborhood. She never made it home. I sat there staring at that single line, reading it over and over. White dress. Last seen near the cemetery, the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight. According to the report, searches were conducted for weeks. Bloodhounds, volunteers, deputies. Nothing was ever found. Her family eventually moved away. The case went cold. I traced my thumb over the faded ink, the words almost smudging under my sweat. It was her, I knew it. Maybe no one else would believe me, but I felt it in my bones. The problem was, she should have been dead for 40 years. I shut the file, slid it back into the box, and sat there for a long time, the lamp humming above me. The office outside was quiet. I felt like I was the only living person left in that building, surrounded by ghosts. That night, when I drove past the cemetery, I couldn't help myself. I slowed the cruiser, looked at her through the fog, and whispered under my breath, "Marjorie." And I swear to God she moved. Not much, just the faintest tilt of her head toward me. Like the sound of her own name reached her, like it mattered. I floored the gas, heart slamming, but the damage was already done. From that point on, it wasn't just her presence that haunted me. It was the weight of her story. She wasn't some nameless figure anymore. She was a missing woman, a person who had once lived in this town, who had once had a job, a family, a name. The next day, I called the county clerk and asked for any old newspaper clippings related to the case. She didn't think much of it. Most deputies never cared about cold files, but she dug around and found a small stack. Most were short pieces. Local woman missing. Search continues for Marjorie Klein. A single column buried beneath headlines about politics and farming. But one article stuck out. It was an interview with her mother. The woman said Marjorie was a kind soul, too trusting for her own good. She had a habit of stopping to talk to strangers even when she was late for work. Her mother begged for anyone with information to come forward. She said, "I just want my daughter to rest. I just want to know where she is." That line gutted me, because as I sat there in my cruiser at 2 in the morning, looking through the fog at that woman in white, I knew exactly where she was. And she hadn't rested. Not in 40 years. That realization burrowed into me. I couldn't let it go. Every night I saw her, I started whispering her name under my breath. Sometimes I swore I saw her lips move in return, though no sound came. But here's the part that scared me most. She never once turned fully toward me. She always kept her attention on the gate, like whatever kept her there. Wasn't about me at all. One night, as I sat parked across the road, I pulled the file from my passenger seat again and stared at her photograph. The resemblance was undeniable. The shape of the jaw, the angle of the cheekbones. It was her. But then a terrible thought hit me. What if she wasn't standing there because she wanted help? What if she wasn't there to be found at all? What if she was still trapped? Maybe by the night she disappeared. Maybe by the ground beneath her feet. Maybe by the thing she stared at through those bars every single night. I don't know what I expected to find in those records. Closure? Answers? But the truth only made things worse, because now I couldn't dismiss her as some hallucination or trick of light. She had a name, a past, a history carved into the town's memory. She was real, and that meant whatever held her here was real too. That night, as I finally drove past the gate again, headlights cutting through the fog, she stood there waiting as always. White dress, pale skin, eyes fixed on the iron bars, and I felt a terrible certainty crawl through me like ice. She wasn't keeping watch for herself. She was keeping watch for the rest of us. By the 3rd week, I knew I was losing sleep. My wife said I looked pale, hollow-eyed. She thought it was just the night shifts, the way they drained you, but I knew better. It wasn't the hours that haunted me. It was her, Marjorie. I kept saying her name in my head as if it gave me some control. But in truth, the name only made her presence sharper, heavier. It was like calling out into a deep cave and waiting for the echo to answer. And sometimes I thought I heard one. I'd pass by the cemetery, and my breath would catch before I even saw the gate. And sure enough, she'd be there. Her white dress faintly glowing against the fog, her hand brushing those iron bars. Always the bars, always that strange tilt of her head, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. The more I watched her, the more I started noticing details I had missed before. For one, she never stood inside the cemetery. Always outside, a few feet back from the gate, never crossing. Even when the fog thickened so much the trees vanished, her shape never wavered from that spot, and her hand on the bars. It wasn't the touch of someone trying to pull them open. It was the grip of someone testing their strength, someone making sure they held. That thought festered in me, turning over and over like a stone in my gut, because it meant one thing: she wasn't waiting to get in. She was guarding it. The realization came slowly, piece by piece. I tried to shake it, but every time I passed her, every time I saw the way her eyes flicked back to that gate, I couldn't deny it. I remember one night, I finally pulled the cruiser over again. I sat there with the headlights pointed right at her, engine idling, my hands gripping the wheel so hard they ached. I whispered, "What are you keeping out?" The words slipped from me before I could stop them. She didn't look at me. She never did, not directly. But her lips moved, slow, deliberate. I couldn't hear a sound, not a whisper, not even the scrape of air. But I swear to you, I understood anyway, not out, I thought. In I left so fast I barely remember the drive home. The next day, I pulled the county records again, this time looking not just at Marjorie's file, but at the cemetery itself. Who was buried there? What had happened around those years? There were whispers, of course. Old stories passed down through families. Strange noises. Accidents near the cemetery road. Talk of someone digging where they shouldn't have. Nothing concrete, nothing official, but enough to paint a picture. That ground had a reputation long before Marjorie vanished. One article from the 40s mentioned unmarked graves being uncovered during a flood. The town quickly reburied the remains, moved on like nothing happened. But I kept thinking, what if something was left unsettled? What if the cemetery wasn't just holding the dead, but something else? The idea clung to me like mildew. By the end of the month, I wasn't just afraid of her. I was afraid of the gate. I began to dream about it. In those dreams, I'd walk the gravel road alone, the fog wrapping around me like wet cloth. I'd see the gate rising in front of me, taller than it had any right to be. And behind those bars, shadows pressed forward. Hands, faces, too many to count. All pushing, straining, waiting for the iron to give way, and there she was, Marjorie. Her dress whipping in a wind I couldn't feel. Her hands braced on the bars, holding them shut with a strength her thin arms shouldn't have had. Every dream ended the same way, her eyes locking onto mine and the faintest shake of her head. A warning. When I'd wake, my chest would be tight, my sheets damp with sweat. And I'd know without question that it wasn't just a dream. One shift, the fog was thicker than ever, the kind that swallows headlights whole. I crept down that road, and as the gate came into view, I saw her, except this time, something was different. She wasn't alone. Behind the bars, I thought I saw movement. Not clear, not solid, but shapes shifting in the mist, as though something on the other side was pressing forward, waiting for a chance. And her posture, tense, rigid, both hands now gripping the iron, her knuckles pale against the black bars. Her dress lifted slightly, though the air around me was still. I froze. My whole body told me to turn around, to drive the other way, to never come back, but I couldn't. I was rooted there, staring, my heart hammering so loud I swore it would echo off the stones. Then came the sound. It started low, like the groan of something heavy shifting underground. The gate rattled just slightly, the iron shivering against its hinges. My cruiser's engine seemed to stutter with it, like the vibration reached through the ground and into the frame. And her, Marjorie, she pressed harder, her face twisted in effort, though no sound left her mouth. That was when I realized the truth clear as day, clear as the dread sinking into me. She wasn't trapped outside. She wasn't waiting for help. She was the only thing keeping it contained, whatever it was. I slammed the car into drive and tore out of there. tires spitting gravel, not daring to look back. I drove until the fog thinned, until the cold air in my lungs burned, until I could finally breathe again. But even then, the image stuck with me. The way her body braced against those bars. Her strength inhuman, her silence unbroken. A gatekeeper. For days afterward, I avoided that road. I took longer patrols, circling around, telling myself it wasn't worth it. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. Because even if I never laid eyes on her again, I couldn't forget what I'd seen. And worse, I couldn't forget the feeling I had as I sped away that night. That the bars had rattled harder than before. That her thin arms had trembled, not with weakness, but with strain. And that one day, maybe not soon, maybe not in my lifetime, but one day, those gates would fail, and she wouldn't be there to hold them shut anymore. There's something about cemeteries at night that doesn't sit right with me. Always has. The silence out there feels different, heavier than anywhere else, like the ground itself is holding its breath. When I was assigned to patrol near the South Cemetery, I thought I'd gotten used to it after the whole thing with the woman at the gate. But cemeteries don't ever let you get used to them. They've got layers, secrets that only show themselves when you've spent enough time in the dark, when your guard slips. That's how I found the mausoleum. It wasn't new to me. I'd seen it before. A small stone building tucked back near the far side of the grounds, old granite walls and a heavy steel door. The kind of thing families used to build when they had money to spare before they fell out of fashion. I'd passed it plenty of times during patrols. It never stood out, just another structure among headstones and trees. But one night around 2 in the morning, I heard something that made me stop dead. Static. At first, I thought it was the radio in my cruiser. But when I turned the volume down, it was still there. Faint, scratchy, like an old signal drifting through heavy weather. I cut the engine and sat for a moment, trying to place it. The sound wasn't coming from my dash. It was outside. I stepped out, boots crunching on damp gravel, and the night hit me. Cold air, the faint smell of pine and soil. I tilted my head and listened. There it was again. A steady hiss, broken now and then by the crackle of shifting frequency. I followed it, flashlight sweeping over crooked stones and patches of fog curling between them. The sound grew sharper the closer I got to the far side of the cemetery, and then I realized it was coming from the mausoleum. I stopped a few feet away, staring at the heavy steel door. The static bled through the stone walls, faint but clear. Like a radio stuck between stations, I knew damn well there wasn't supposed to be power in that building. It wasn't connected to anything. The door had been sealed shut for years, the lock rusted over, the hinges thick with moss, yet from inside, the sound persisted. I approached slowly, my light tracing the name carved into the stone lintel above the door. The letters were faded, half-eaten by time. A family name I didn't recognize. Probably no one left alive who remembered them. The closer I got, the louder the static grew. Not deafening, but enough to crawl under my skin. I pressed my ear to the cold stone and listened. Behind the static, I thought I heard something else. A voice. Not clear. Not even whole words. Just fragments, slipping through the hiss, like syllables carried on the tide of a bad transmission. I staggered back, heart pounding. My flashlight beam shook against the door. It didn't make sense. No batteries, no wires, no way for a signal to reach inside a sealed stone crypt. But the sound was there, crawling out through the cracks, clinging to the fog around me. I reached for the door handle without thinking. Cold metal bit into my palm. I pulled. It didn't budge. I tried again, harder. Nothing. The lock was solid, unmoving. The mausoleum held fast. The static wavered, rising and falling like a breath. And then, just for a moment, I heard it. A word, clear, sharp, too real to be my imagination. It said, "Sheriff." I ripped my hand from the door like it had burned me. The sound faded instantly, dropping back into low static like it had never spoken at all. I backed away, nearly tripping over the uneven ground, my beam slicing across headstones as if something might come lurching out of the shadows. But the cemetery remained still, quiet, except for that faint, impossible hiss inside the mausoleum. I stood there for a long time, my breath fogging in the cold air. My own name. It had spoken my name. I wanted to radio it in, to call someone else out there to hear it. But I stopped myself. I knew what it would sound like. Static in a cemetery. Voices in the stone. They'd think I'd cracked under the graveyard shift, so I did what I always did. I kept it to myself. I got back in the cruiser, slammed the door shut, and turned the radio on full just to drown it out. Some late-night country song filled the cab, and I clung to it like a lifeline. But even as I drove away, headlights sweeping over rows of graves, I swore the static followed me. That night when I tried to sleep, it was still in my head. That faint hiss rising and falling, carrying something just beneath the surface. Something waiting for me to listen closer. The next night, I told myself I wouldn't go near the mausoleum. I'd take the other side of the cemetery road, keep my eyes forward, pretend it didn't exist. But as I drove past, I could already hear it again. The static, faint but steady, waiting, and I knew, with the same certainty that I'd known with the woman at the gate, that it wasn't going to stop. Not until I opened that door. The second night, I heard the static. I knew it wasn't just me losing my mind. I'd told myself I was going to ignore it, that I wasn't going to get anywhere near that mausoleum again. But cemeteries have a way of pulling you back to the places you fear most. They sit there in the dark, waiting for you, knowing you'll circle around sooner or later, and I did. It was just after 1 in the morning. The fog was thick, spilling low across the ground like something alive. I drove my usual path, headlights cutting through patches of stone and trees, the cruiser humming beneath me. Everything looked normal, but I could hear it. Even before I turned the corner that led to the mausoleum, the static was already there, low, faint, but steady. I gripped the wheel tighter, telling myself I could pass it by. I didn't need to stop. Not again. But the sound rose the closer I came, hissing through the night like a whisper in the walls. By the time my headlights washed over the stone building, the static was sharp and constant, as if the mausoleum itself was breathing it out. I killed the engine and sat there in silence. Just listening, the hiss broke, shifted, and then came back stronger, and then beneath it, a voice, not like the night before. This one was clearer. Not enough to understand right away, but enough to know it wasn't random. I stepped out of the cruiser, the cold air biting my skin, and walked toward the door. My flashlight beam trembled against the old granite. The static wavered. And then through it, a name. Henry Wallace. I froze. The voice was flat, mechanical, like something from an old broadcast. But the name was familiar. Too familiar. Henry Wallace had been buried 2 nights earlier. Heart attack. I'd been there when they lowered the casket into the ground, not 50 feet from where I stood now. The voice repeated it. Henry Wallace. Henry Wallace. Over and over like a broken recording, I stumbled back a step, nearly dropping the flashlight. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe some kind of prank? Someone with equipment hidden inside? But how? That mausoleum had been locked for decades. The door was rusted shut, and then another name. Sarah McClendon. My blood ran cold. I knew that one too. She'd passed just last week. A long illness. Her funeral had been smaller, but I remembered it. The static hissed, then repeated her name again and again until it slipped into the next. Mark Ellison. That one hit harder, because I'd just come from the sheriff's office earlier that evening, where a file had crossed my desk. Mark Ellison, 57. Found dead in his kitchen by a neighbor who hadn't seen him in days. The funeral hadn't even been scheduled yet. No one outside law enforcement should have known his name. But the mausoleum did. I stood there in the fog, staring at the sealed door, the voices pouring out like a roll call of the dead, one after another. People I knew. People I'd seen lowered into the ground or zipped into body bags, or written reports about, each name spoken flat, toneless, repeated 3 times before moving on. I pressed my palms against my ears, trying to block it out, but it didn't matter. I could still hear them. Not with my ears, but deeper. Like the sound was sinking straight into my skull. I stumbled back to the cruiser, slammed the door, and turned on the radio full blast. Some talk show filled the cabin, sharp voices arguing about politics, but underneath, I still heard it. The names, they threaded through the static of my own radio. as if it had followed me. I drove until I was out of the cemetery, out past the tree line, back onto the main road where the streetlights broke the dark. Only then did it fade, leaving me in silence so sharp it hurt. When I got home that night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey, staring at the wood grain, trying to convince myself there had to be an explanation, a transmitter hidden somewhere, old wiring, maybe even some crazy local prank. But deep down, I knew better, because it wasn't just random names. It wasn't pulling them from obituaries or newspapers. It was only the people buried there, and it knew them before the world did. The next shift, I tried to avoid it again. I told myself I'd stick to the north end, do my rounds, and stay the hell away from that stone building. But death doesn't care what promises you make to yourself. Around 2, the call came through the scanner. A fatal car crash just outside of town. A man in his 30s. I went to the scene. Broken glass, twisted metal, blood on the asphalt. The medics worked fast, but it was no use. I saw the sheet pulled over him myself. When I got back to the cemetery later that night, the mausoleum was waiting for me, and the first name I heard through the static. His spoken in that flat mechanical tone, repeated 3 times, like it had been expecting him. I stood frozen in the fog, staring at that sealed steel door. And I realized something that made my stomach turn. The mausoleum wasn't just speaking the dead, it was announcing them, calling them out as they arrived, almost like a broadcast list, almost like a schedule. And if that was true, then how far ahead could it go? How much did it already know? That night, I couldn't stop wondering one thing, when it finally ran out of other names. Would it say mine? I'd been dreading it. Every time I drove past the mausoleum, every time I heard the static start to crawl through the night air, I wondered if this would be the night it said my name. The thought clung to me like a sickness. For days, I barely slept. When I did, I dreamt of voices whispering from stone walls, a hiss that never stopped, and names spoken in that hollow, lifeless tone. Names of people I knew, faces I'd seen lowered into the ground, and always I waited for mine. It was the 3rd week when it finally happened. That night was colder than most. A heavy wind had picked up, pushing the fog in uneven waves across the cemetery. My headlights cut through patches of it, and the cruiser's heater struggled to keep the glass clear. I told myself I'd keep driving. I told myself I wouldn't stop. But the static was already waiting. I could hear it the second I turned down the gravel road that led to the mausoleum. Low, steady, like a radio signal that had been left running for decades. I slowed without meaning to. My hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles turned white. And then, just as my headlights swept over the stone walls, the static broke. A name bled through. Not someone I recognized. Another soul I hadn't met, repeated 3 times. Then lost back to the hiss, and then another, and another, the roll call of the dead. I gritted my teeth, tried to drown it out with the hum of the engine, but it didn't matter. The sound found me. It always did. And then it shifted. The static swelled, cracked, and in that broken space between noise, I heard it. My name. Spoken flat, toneless, 3 times in a row. Sheriff. I froze. The wheel slipped in my grip. The sound of my own title, my own name, pulled through the static like it had been waiting for me. Cold shot through my chest, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. It repeated, just as it had for the others. Sheriff, sheriff, sheriff. I slammed the cruiser into park, shoved the door open, and stumbled out into the cold night air. My breath came out in ragged clouds as I staggered toward the mausoleum, flashlight beam quivering against the granite walls. The static roared now, louder than it had ever been. It pressed into me, through me, like it was inside my bones, and beneath it, the voice kept repeating, Sheriff! 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 I staggered up to the door and pressed my palms against the cold steel. Why? I whispered, my voice shaking. Why me? The static flared, sharp enough to sting my ears, and then dropped low again. And then came something I hadn't expected. A different word. Not just my name this time. It said, incoming. The word hit me like a stone to the gut. Incoming? I whispered. The static hissed. Then the word repeated, incoming, 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 and then silence. I stood there in the fog, palms pressed to the cold steel door, listening for more. But the mausoleum had gone quiet. The static was gone. For the first time since I'd heard it, the air around that building was silent. And somehow, that silence was worse. I backed away slowly, my chest tight, eyes locked on the stone as if it might crack open at any second. My light swept across the engraved family name above the door, the moss clinging to the corners, the heavy rusted lock. It hadn't moved. It hadn't opened. But I knew it had spoken, and I knew what it meant. It hadn't been calling me like it called the others. It hadn't been announcing my death. Not yet. It was warning me about something coming. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even go home. I drove aimlessly, up and down back roads, across the county line anywhere I could to put distance between me and that stone building. But no matter how far I drove, the sound stayed with me, a faint hiss in the back of my head. My name. That single word, incoming. By dawn, I was shaking. Not from the cold, but from the knowledge that the mausoleum hadn't finished. It had spoken once. It would speak again, and whatever was coming, whatever was incoming, it had to be something worse than death itself. Because for the first time, I realized the mausoleum wasn't just a place for the dead. It was a signal tower, a transmitter, and now it had me on its frequency. You get used to silence on the graveyard shift. Most of the time, it's just you, your cruiser, and miles of dark road stretching through farmland, woods, or, when it's my turn, cemeteries. The radio barely crackles. Calls don't usually come in until morning. If something happens after midnight, it's usually bad. Real bad. That night, though, it wasn't calls or trouble that started it. It was just absence, a silence I didn't expect. It started around 2 a.m. I was parked near the north fence of the cemetery, engine idling, headlights off, just keeping an eye out. Fog drifted low, and the trees rattled now and then in the wind. Nothing unusual. I keyed up the radio. Unit 7, status check. Dead air. Usually, Deputy Alvarez answered quick. He was good about that, even joked that I worried too much. But this time, nothing came through. I tried again. Unit 7, you copy? Static. Not the kind from the mausoleum. Not the kind that hissed with voices underneath. Just empty static from a radio searching for a signal. That made my stomach tighten. Because Alvarez wasn't more than a mile away. We'd been patrolling in tandem all night, circling opposite ends of the cemetery, checking in every half hour. I drove slowly down the gravel road, headlights cutting through the fog. My gut was already telling me something wasn't right. Halfway down the south path, I saw it. Empty road. No taillights ahead. No headlights coming toward me. Just fog curling over gravestones and trees swaying like black figures in the dark. I pulled over, grabbed the mic again and said, Unit 7, this is Unit 2. Report. Silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. Alvarez's last check-in had been maybe 15 minutes before. His voice had sounded normal, steady. He'd said he was near the east side fence watching the tree line. No noise in the background, no strain in his tone. Nothing to suggest anything wrong, and now, nothing. I turned onto the east road, gravel crunching under the tires. My spotlight swept across the fence line, beams carving into the fog. I expected to see the glow of his cruiser any second, but the road stretched empty. I slowed, heart pounding. I kept telling myself he might have pulled off somewhere, maybe gone to check on something on foot. But the longer I drove, the less I believed it. Finally, I came to a stop where the east road curved back toward the main path. That's where I saw it. Tire tracks, fresh ones. They cut sharp off the gravel road and into the grass, straight toward the tree line. I killed the engine, grabbed my light, and stepped out. The night swallowed me whole. Cold air clung to my skin, damp with fog. I followed the tracks slowly, sweeping the beam ahead. The grass was pressed down deep, mud torn up where the cruiser had forced its way forward, and then the tracks just stopped. 10 feet from the trees, the ground flattened. No more pressed grass. No more mud torn open. Just untouched earth, wet leaves, and silence. I turned in a slow circle, light darting across the cemetery, my throat dry. No car, no taillights, no Alvarez. It was like his cruiser had driven into the fog and never come out the other side. My first thought was that maybe he'd reversed, turned back out without me noticing. But the tracks didn't show that. There were no turning marks, no second set of grooves, just a straight path forward, ending in nothing. I crouched down, ran my fingers over the last few inches of the tracks. The mud was damp, fresh. This had just happened. I raised the radio again, my hand shaking. Unit 7, respond. Static. Alvarez, do you copy? Where are you? Nothing. My light swept the tree line again. Black trunks rose up like sentries in the fog. My gut twisted, a deep ache that made my chest tight. Something about that silence pressed in on me, heavy, suffocating. I thought about going in, stepping past the fence into the trees, but I didn't. Because the ground told me everything I needed to know. The car hadn't gone in. It had gone nowhere. It had just stopped existing. I stumbled back to the cruiser, heart pounding hard enough to make my vision blur. I sat there with the engine running, staring out at the fog, praying Alvarez would come over the radio with some dumb joke about his equipment cutting out. But he didn't. I drove every path in that cemetery, every curve of gravel, every stretch of fence. I circled for hours, but there was no sign of him. No cruiser, no lights, no Alvarez. By dawn, I had to make the call. I reported him missing, tried to explain about the tire tracks, the way they just stopped. The dispatcher's voice cracked on the other end when she asked me to repeat it. When other deputies came out later, they didn't find anything either. Just the tracks. Just the place where they ended. No broken fence. No wreckage. No evidence of someone towing the car out. Just nothing. For weeks, they searched. We all did. Woods, rivers, back roads, even abandoned barns miles from town. They brought dogs, drones, volunteers, but there was no trace. It was like Alvarez and his cruiser had been swallowed whole. The cemetery went quiet after that. Quieter than usual. None of us wanted to patrol it anymore, but someone had to. And more often than not, it ended up being me. Every time I passed the East Road, I saw those tracks in my head. I saw the way they just stopped, cut off in the middle of nowhere, and I thought about Alvarez sitting in his cruiser, radio in hand, headlights on, and then nothing. I still hear myself that night calling his name into the static, and I still hear the silence that answered back. The kind of silence that doesn't just mean someone's gone, it means something took them. And the worst part, I don't think Alvarez was the first, and I don't think he'll be the last. I don't sleep much these days. My hours are cut into strange pieces. Naps that last 20 minutes at most. Then I jolt awake, heart racing, mind stuck on things I'd rather not think about. That night was no different. I'd been staring at the ceiling for what felt like forever, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. By the time I gave up and slid back into my boots, it was close to 2 in the morning. Patrol wasn't even on the schedule for me, but I couldn't stay in bed. My head was too loud, my nerves too raw. I told myself I'd drive the back roads for a bit, maybe circle through town, make sure everything was quiet. Truth is, I just didn't want to be alone in the house anymore. The air outside was sharp with cold. I remember standing on the porch, breath fogging in front of me, looking at how still everything was. No wind, no sound, even the night bugs had gone silent. I got in the cruiser and rolled out, headlights cutting across empty fields, fences, and that endless stretch of dark. Halfway down County Road 6, my radio hissed. Not a call, just static, quick and faint. It caught me off guard because dispatch had been dead silent all night. I lifted the receiver, checked in, but there was no reply. Just that soft fizz of white noise that seemed to fade as soon as I spoke into it. I should have turned back. Should have shrugged it off, gone home, tried to sleep. But something about that sound felt deliberate, almost like it was pulling me somewhere. And I followed. By the time I reached the old cemetery, the sky had clouded over. The moon was gone, swallowed in dark. I slowed the car, headlights sweeping across the crooked fence line, the leaning stones, the bare trees reaching up like bones. It was the kind of place that already carries its own weight, even on a normal night. But that night, the moment my headlights touched it, I felt it. Like a pressure in the chest, a heaviness in the air, as if the ground itself was waiting for me. Then I saw it. Headlights. Not mine. They glowed from deeper inside the cemetery, pale and sharp, cutting straight across the rows of graves. At first I thought someone had pulled off the main road. Maybe another deputy making rounds. Maybe some kids trying to scare themselves. But then I saw the angle. The beams weren't just scattered, they were aimed. Perfectly lined up, pointing at something. I crept closer, wheels crunching slow over gravel, heart thudding hard against my ribs. The light revealed more and more as I drew in. A cruiser. One of ours. My throat went dry. I knew that car. The number painted on the side, the dent in the rear fender, it was the same unit that had vanished 2 weeks before. The one assigned to Deputy Miller the night he went missing. Every report, every search, every theory we had spun, it all hit me at once. And yet there it was, sitting in the cemetery like it had never left. Engine humming, exhaust curling from the tailpipe, headlights burning bright. I killed my own engine and just sat there, staring. I don't know how long I stayed frozen, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing through every possibility. Stolen, returned, prank, dream. None of it made sense. That car was gone. It had vanished. And now here it was, pointed at something I couldn't see yet. Finally, I forced myself out. My boots crunched against the dirt path as I moved toward it. The air had that damp smell, like turned soil, like rain that hadn't fallen yet. The closer I got, the more I noticed the sound. Beneath the rumble of the idling engine, there was a faint clicking, not steady, not mechanical. More like a tapping somewhere ahead, as if something small was moving against stone. I walked around the front of the cruiser, shielding my eyes against the headlights, and that's when I saw where they were aimed, an open grave. The earth was fresh, piled in uneven heaps at the edges. The hole was deep, the bottom swallowed in black. And those lights, they weren't just shining on it. They were locked onto it, like the car had been positioned with exact intent. I froze at the edge, staring down. My breath fogged out in front of me, drifting into the beam of light, breaking against the still air. The tapping stopped, and the silence that followed. It wasn't normal silence. It was the kind that makes your ears strain, makes your pulse sound too loud in your own head. I whispered Miller's name before I realized I'd even opened my mouth. No answer. The driver's door of the cruiser was shut. The windows fogged from the inside. I walked to it slow, every step careful, my hand resting near my holster without me thinking about it. When I reached the door, I tugged on the handle. It opened. The dome light flickered on, weak and yellow. The seat was empty. Keys were in the ignition, engine still turning. Radio crackling faint static. But the worst part was the smell. Not rot, not decay. It was colder than that, sharper, like damp stone and rust. Like the inside of a basement that hadn't been touched in decades. It rolled out in a wave as I leaned in, and it made my stomach twist. I pulled back and shut the door. My eyes drifted to the open grave again. The dirt looked freshly dug, but no shovel, no tools were anywhere in sight. Just the raw ground, clawed up, messy, like it hadn't been dug so much as pulled open from below. I don't know why I did it, but I crouched closer, peering into the dark. At first, nothing. Just the beam of light skimming over rough soil, roots hanging loose. Then as I leaned farther, I thought I saw something shift. Not movement exactly. More like the suggestion of depth. Like the hole didn't stop where it should have. Like it went farther down, farther than any grave had a right to. And then I heard it. My name, whispered. Drawn out of the dark, thin as a breath. I stumbled back so fast I nearly tripped over myself. My hand was on my weapon before I even knew it, eyes locked on that pit. Nothing. No face, no shadow, no figure rising. Just the empty grave and the hum of Miller's cruiser behind me. But the whisper lingered in my ears. My name, not shouted, not spoken, just known. I should have called it in. Should have radioed for backup, logged it, anything. But I didn't. I couldn't. The radio in Miller's car was still hissing, and when I reached for mine, it answered only with the same static. Like both of them were tuned to something else. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for the grave to move, for someone to climb out, for Miller to step into the light. No one did. Finally, I forced myself back to my own cruiser. The whole way, I felt the weight of those headlights burning into my back like they were holding me in place. I didn't dare look behind me until I was in the driver's seat. When I did, the grave was still open. Miller's cruiser still idling. But in that moment, I swore the beam of the lights had shifted, even if just a little, angled higher, reaching farther into the dark, almost as if they were following something I couldn't see. I put the car in gear and pulled away, slow at first, then faster. I didn't breathe until the cemetery was behind me, the fence swallowed in black. But I couldn't shake it. That grave was waiting. Not empty, not full, just waiting. And Miller's car. His car was no longer missing. It was guarding something. Something that knew my name. I've worked nights long enough to know the patterns of sound. The way an owl carries its call, the way a coyote's yip bounces through the hills, even the strange creaks of the old cemetery fence in the wind. You pick these things up after years of listening. After years of knowing when the dark is empty and when it isn't. That night, I knew the dark wasn't empty. It was around 2 in the morning. The hour when silence feels thicker, heavier, like the world itself has gone still. I was driving past the cemetery when I heard it. Laughter. Not the laughter of drunk adults stumbling home, not the broken bark of teenagers daring each other on the tombstones. This was high-pitched, light, quick. Children. It came from the tree line just beyond the graves. At first I thought maybe my radio had caught something, a stray frequency bleeding through, but the radio was silent. No static, no hiss, just that laughter drifting in from the woods. It didn't fit. There aren't children out here. Not at that hour. Not in the cold. And not running wild in the cemetery of all places. I parked and shut off the engine. The sudden quiet pressed in, my ears straining. I waited, holding my breath like that might help me hear better. The laughter came again. A chorus this time. More than one voice overlapping, tumbling into each other in the way only children can. It rose, then broke apart, like they were playing some game just out of sight. I stepped out of the car. My boots touched gravel, and the sound seemed too loud, clumsy against the fragile air of that moment. I reached for my flashlight but didn't switch it on yet. Instead, I stood there, squinting at the line of trees. The cemetery stretched out in front of me, rows of stones glinting under the thin slice of moon. Beyond them, the woods looked darker than usual, thick and full, like the shadows had gathered themselves extra deep. That's where the laughter came from. I started walking, slow, my breath fogged out in front of me, carried away by the faintest breeze. Each step crunched against the ground, and each step made me feel like I was breaking some unspoken rule. I kept telling myself it was probably just local kids. Maybe they'd snuck out. Maybe they were playing at scaring each other. But deep down, I didn't believe that. The sound wasn't right. Laughter should carry warmth. Even mischief has a pulse of life in it. But this laughter was thin, like it had been stretched. Like it was more memory than sound. I stopped when I reached the first row of graves. The air shifted colder, sharp enough to sting the inside of my nose. I scanned the stones, the trees, the ground between them. The laughter stopped. Silence rushed in fast, like the woods had swallowed the sound whole. My heart ticked hard in my chest, each beat louder than the last. Then a whisper of movement. Leaves shifting, branches clicking against each other. Small footsteps, quick, darting between trunks. And then, laughter again. Off to the side this time, higher pitched. Too close. I swung toward it, beam of my flashlight cutting through the dark. The trees glowed pale under it, bark rough and glistening in places. Nothing there, but the laughter kept going, first behind me, then in front, then circling, weaving in ways no group of kids could manage in that space of time. It wasn't just laughter anymore either. Between the bursts of giggling, I heard something else. Words, not clear enough to understand, not spoken plain. Just broken syllables, soft as if spoken through cupped hands. I stood frozen. Every hair on my arms lifting, mouth gone dry. I wanted to call out, announce myself, demand they come out, but the words caught in my throat. Some part of me was afraid of what would happen if I gave my voice to that place. Instead, I turned the beam of the flashlight back toward the stones. That's when I saw them. Small shapes, low to the ground, standing just beyond the edge of the graves. Not moving, not even shifting in the light. Just standing, watching, children. At least, that's what they looked like at first glance. There were 3, maybe 4, hard to tell through the branches. Their outlines were pale, their clothes indistinct. The light didn't catch them the way it should have. I tried to focus, to take in the details. Hair, eyes, something I could ground myself on. But the longer I looked, the less sure I became. Their heads tilted slightly, almost in unison. And then, as if on some silent cue, they laughed. That same broken sound, overlapping, too sharp at the edges. It echoed strangely, like it wasn't coming from their mouths at all, but from the trees themselves. My stomach dropped. My hand went to my radio, but the second I pressed the button, the laughter stopped again. Dead quiet. Only the faint crackle of static answered on the other end. I released the button, and the laughter returned, closer this time. I staggered back a step, flashlight shaking in my hand. The beam darted over the trees, over the ground, over the pale shapes that seemed to slip in and out of sight, as if the light couldn't decide whether to hold them or not. I don't know how long I stood there, caught between fear and disbelief. Long enough for the cold to bite through my jacket, long enough for my breath to come sharp and uneven. Finally, I forced myself to speak. "Who's out there?" The words cracked out of me harsher than I meant. My own voice sounded strange in the space, like it didn't belong. No answer. Then, a giggle right behind me. I spun, beam slicing the dark, heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing. Just the empty cemetery. The endless woods. But in that split second, I swear I felt breath against the back of my neck. I ran. Not all out, not blind panic, but quick, controlled, each step driving me back toward the cruiser. I didn't look behind me. Didn't want to see if anything was following. When I reached the car, I threw myself inside, locked the doors, started the engine. The headlights flared on, carving the dark wide open. The tree line looked the same as always. Still. Silent. Empty. No children. No shapes. No laughter. I sat there with the engine running, breathing hard. Hands tight on the wheel. I told myself I'd imagined it. That my mind had twisted some sounds in the night, turned them into something they weren't. But deep down, I knew better. That laughter didn't belong in the woods, and it sure as hell didn't belong in the cemetery at 2 in the morning. After that night with the laughter, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were watching me, even in daylight. When I drove past the cemetery, my eyes drifted to that tree line. The branches stood thick, knitted together like bars of a cage. Every gust of wind that shook them made me tense. I told myself not to let it get under my skin. Told myself I'd heard kids sneaking around, maybe even caught a trick of sound. But deep down, I didn't buy it. And the worst part? I knew I'd end up going back. A week later, I found myself on that same shift, the same hour, patrolling near the cemetery. The radio crackled faintly in the quiet, but otherwise the night was still. Too still. It was around 2 when I parked by the fence again. I don't know why I did it. Habit, maybe? Or something else, tugging at me, pulling me toward the trees. The laughter didn't come that night, but the silence felt heavier than before, like the world was holding its breath. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. My boots crunched over gravel, then over the frozen grass by the headstones. I aimed the beam at the woods, half hoping to catch something there. Instead of laughter, I heard a creak. A long, drawn-out squeak, faint, almost lost in the air. It took me a second to place it. It sounded like a swing. I froze. Listening harder, another squeak followed. Slower this time, like the chains were rusty. Then another. Back and forth, steady, like someone was sitting there, pumping their legs just enough to keep the seat moving. I knew the woods back there. I'd hiked those trails more than once in daylight. There wasn't a playground anywhere near, not for miles. But the sound was real. I stepped closer. The beam cutting through trunks, catching glimpses of roots, dead leaves, the shimmer of frost on low brush. And then I saw it, half hidden between the trees. Tilted at an angle like the earth was trying to swallow it, stood a swing set, old, rusted, the frame crooked, one leg sunk deep into the dirt. The chains rattled faintly in the wind, though the air around me was still. The seats hung low, one missing altogether, the other moving slow, like someone had just left it. Behind it I saw more, a slide bent in the middle, the metal eaten through with rust. A merry-go-round, its paint flaked and peeling, tilted to one side as if it had collapsed under its own weight. A seesaw with one end buried in the earth, a whole playground, out here, in the middle of the woods. My stomach tightened. My first thought was that maybe this had been here decades ago, left to rot, forgotten. But it didn't make sense. I'd been through these woods plenty of times. Something like this. You don't just miss it. I walked closer, my flashlight bouncing over the equipment. The beam caught a swing seat, and for a second I swore I saw small handprints pressed into the faded plastic. The creak came again. The swing moved just a little. I stopped dead. The air around me was sharp, biting cold, though the night wasn't much colder than any other. It felt heavier here, thicker. Like the trees were holding something in. I shined the light over the merry-go-round. Its surface was streaked with rust, but in the center, clear as day, I saw carvings, initials, dozens of them, etched deep into the metal, and among them, my own. I stumbled back a step, breath catching in my throat. My light shook, beam trembling across the bark of the trees. I'd never been here before, never. But there it was, carved in, plain as day. My initials with a date scrawled beside it, a date that hadn't come yet. The squeak of the swing cut through the air again. This time, the sound wasn't alone. It was followed by laughter, soft, high-pitched, just like before. I spun the beam around, but the woods were empty. Just shadows stretching long and deep. The laughter came again, from the other side, then from behind me, then circling, the same way it had by the graves. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a ring. I wanted to call out, but my throat tightened shut. The sound of their laughter didn't leave room for my voice. Instead, I backed away, step by step, the beam never steady. The laughter grew louder, overlapping, bouncing in ways it shouldn't have. It wasn't echo, it was too sharp for that. It was more like the woods themselves were splitting open and letting the sound pour out. The swing moved again, harder this time, like something had kicked off from the ground. The merry-go-round groaned, giving a slow half-turn. I couldn't breathe. I turned, forcing myself to keep walking, forcing my legs to move even though they felt like stone. The laughter followed, not fading, not falling behind, following. By the time I broke out of the tree line and into the cemetery, my chest was tight, my vision blurred at the edges. I didn't run. Running felt like it would make it worse, like it would invite something to chase me. But when I reached the cruiser, I didn't hesitate. I slammed the door shut, locked it, started the engine. The headlights cut wide over the stones. The woods stood silent again. No swings, no slide. No playground, just trees. I sat there for a long time, gripping the wheel so hard my hands ached. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the dark and the fog had twisted the trees into shapes they weren't. But the sound of that swing stayed in my ears, steady, creaking, back and forth, and the sight of those carved initials, my initials, with a date that hadn't come yet, burned itself deep into my mind. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to. All I knew was this. The children in the tree line weren't just laughing anymore. They were playing, and they wanted me to see. I couldn't shake the playground from my head. The swing, the slide, the merry-go-round, things that weren't supposed to be there, things that seemed to vanish the second I looked away. And worse than all of that, the initials. My initials carved into rust with a date that hadn't come yet. That single detail gnawed at me. It kept me awake at night, replaying over and over. I told myself I should let it go, treat it like a bad dream. But the more I tried, the more I felt it clawing back into my thoughts. So I went digging. The county records office isn't much to look at. Just a squat brick building with filing cabinets stacked like tombs of paper inside. Most people never step foot in there, and I think that's why I went. I needed distance from the cemetery, from the woods, from the laughter. I told myself I was looking for history. Maybe the land had once been something else. Maybe a school or an old park. Maybe that explained the playground. The clerk on duty barely looked up when I walked in, just pointed me toward the back where old case files were boxed up, stacked to the ceiling. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of dust and paper. I pulled a box down, brushed it off, and sat at one of the long wooden tables. The files inside were yellowed, some edges curled, others brittle enough that I had to turn pages with care. At first it was what I expected: property deeds, old maps, survey notes. But then I found a folder marked Missing Persons, Children. The paper felt colder in my hands. I opened it. The first file dated back to the 70s. A boy 8 years old vanished on his way home from school. The picture showed him with a crooked smile, hair a little too long, collar uneven. I stared at that photograph longer than I should have, because I recognized him. I didn't know how at first. It took a few seconds for it to click. But then I remembered the woods, the first night, the shapes in the tree line, and the tilt of one small head. It was the same face. My chest went tight. I flipped to the next file. A girl this time, missing at age 6. No leads, no closure. Just gone. Her picture was clearer. Big round eyes, hair tied in ribbons, and again, I knew her, not from life. Not from the streets of this town, but from that night. The second figure standing near the graves, pale and still, head tilted with the others. I dropped the photograph onto the table and rubbed my hands over my face. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense, but I couldn't stop. I kept going through the files, one after another, and with each picture my stomach dropped further. The missing children stretched across decades, 70s, 80s, 90s, some more recent. Each one with their own file, their own brief history, their own unanswered questions, and each face matched the children I'd seen. I don't know how I was so sure, but I was. The tilt of a chin, the angle of a smile, the size of the frame. Even through grainy old photographs, I recognized them. They were the same. The children in the tree line weren't just children. They were the missing. I don't remember leaving the office. I just remember the weight of those files, the way the images clung to me as I walked out into the pale afternoon light. Driving back, the town looked the same as always. People crossing the street, shops with their lights on, the diner with its chipped sign. But it all felt thinner, like a layer stretched over something darker. That night, I spread the photographs across my desk. The faces stared up at me. A dozen pairs of eyes caught forever in the moment before they vanished. I kept hearing their laughter, rising and falling, tangled in the trees. And every time I glanced toward the window, I expected to see them there, standing in the dark, watching. I tried to reason it out. Maybe my mind had drawn connections where none existed. Maybe the fear of that night had planted something in me, twisting old memories and half-seen shapes. But then my eyes went back to the photo of the boy. The first file I'd pulled, I leaned closer, my heart slowing, my breath caught in my chest. Because carved into the tree trunk behind him, blurred but visible, were initials, not his mine, the same as I'd seen on the merry-go-round. The date wasn't there, but the letters were. I shut the folder and shoved it aside, my hands shaking so badly the paper crumpled under my grip. I didn't want to look anymore. Didn't want to see what else was waiting in those files, but I knew. The children in the photographs hadn't just vanished. They were still here, still laughing, still playing. And now, somehow they had tied me into it, whether through initials, or dates, or the way their pale shapes waited for me in the dark. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that the tree line had their faces, and it was learning mine. I used to think cemeteries were quiet places, peaceful in a way, the kind of ground where time slowed, where nothing could grow except silence and weeds. But that was before the laughter, before the rusted swings, before the photographs. Now I can't step foot near those graves without feeling like I'm trespassing on someone else's territory, someone smaller, younger, and someone who's been waiting far longer than I've been alive. That night, it was about 3 in the morning. I was sitting at my desk in the sheriff's office, just staring at the photographs. The faces of those missing kids were spread out like a deck of cards across the wood. Every one of them tied to a case that never got solved. Every one of them gone long before their time, but they weren't gone. I knew that now. They were out there in the tree line. And the worst part was, the longer I looked at those photos, the less they looked like mugshots or case evidence. And the more they looked like a roster, a list. It hit me when I noticed the way they were lined up in one of the old reports. The investigator back then had written the names down in a column, with ages, dates, and last known locations. And when I compared that list to what I remembered seeing that night at the cemetery, the way the kids were standing shoulder to shoulder in the dark, it matched. Every child in those woods had a place, a spot to stand, like they were waiting for something or someone. I tried to ignore the thought. I tried to push it down into the place where nightmares go when you wake up. But the more I resisted, the louder it got in my head. They weren't wandering. They weren't lost. They were lined up for roll call. I leaned back in my chair, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes. My pulse was steady but heavy, each beat echoing like a knock at the door. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth was already there, staring me down. They were waiting, and if they were waiting, that meant they were expecting someone to come back for them. Parents, guardians, people who never arrived. That was when the sound started. Faint at first. Barely there. But enough to pull me up out of my chair. I thought maybe it was the radio, left on low, or the hum of the vending machine in the corner. But the longer I stood still, the more I realized it wasn't inside the office at all. It was outside, through the walls, through the night. Children's voices. Not laughter this time. Not the sharp, high-pitched echo I'd heard among the graves. This was different. It was softer, rhythmic. Names, like a teacher calling attendance. I didn't even remember leaving the office. But the next thing I knew, I was in my cruiser, engine humming, headlights cutting through the dark streets. The town was asleep, blinds drawn, porches empty. But out there, beyond the edge of the houses, I saw it. The glow of pale shapes shifting among the trees. I parked at the cemetery gate and killed the engine. The silence pressed in hard, broken only by that strange, chanting rhythm. One by one, I could hear the names. I didn't recognize them all, but some stood out. Names I'd read hours earlier in those files. Small voices carried through the trees, answering, "Here, here, here." And with each answer, I saw another shape grow clearer among the line. My legs felt heavy as I forced myself forward. Past the rows of gravestones, down toward the tree line where the sound was strongest. The air grew colder. My breath fogged in front of me. And there they were, the children, all of them, lined up shoulder to shoulder, their heads tilted toward the roll call, their mouths opening only when their name was called. Some were barefoot. Some in clothes that didn't belong to this decade. Torn shirts, scuffed shoes, dresses stained dark with earth. Their skin was pale, but not lifeless. Their eyes fixed forward, unblinking, waiting. My throat tightened. My voice felt trapped somewhere deep in my chest. I wanted to call out, but I couldn't. I just watched. The roll call continued. The names stretched further, echoing in that strange rhythm, and then I heard it. My name, clear as day, called out in that same steady voice. I froze. My body went cold all at once. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the fear had gotten so loud in my head that it tricked me. But then I saw it. At the end of the line, where the children stood shoulder to shoulder, there was a space, an empty space, the same size as the others, as though they'd been saving a place. For me, my stomach dropped. I stumbled back, my boots crunching the grass, my pulse hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The line of children didn't move, didn't turn, but I swear in that moment I felt every one of them watching me. I backed up another step, then another, until I was halfway to the cruiser. My hands shook as I fumbled for the door handle, my breath coming fast and uneven. But just before I climbed in, I looked back one last time. The line was still there, still waiting. The roll call was still being read, and in the rhythm of those voices, I realized something. They weren't just waiting for their parents. They were waiting for all of us, anyone who wandered too close, anyone who stopped to listen. Because once your name was called, there was no leaving the line, and somewhere deep down I knew my name was already written. The only question left was when I'd have to answer. Here. There are things I used to take for granted. The sound of my own footsteps on a quiet road, the way the beam of my flashlight cut through the dark, the shape of my own shadow, stretched long across the ground when the streetlights caught me just right. Simple things, ordinary things, but once you notice something's wrong with the ordinary, there's no going back. I was working a late patrol that night. The kind of shift where nothing's happening, but you still have to be out there, driving around the county, checking the usual spots, the bars, the gas station off Route 6, the strip of road by the cemetery that teenagers like to race down when they thought no one was watching. It was one of those nights where everything felt a little heavier. The air, the silence, even the steering wheel under my hands. I remember pulling off on a side road near the tree line, deciding to walk a stretch just to clear my head. Sometimes the cruiser felt too small, like the walls were pressing in. A little air never hurt. So I left the headlights pointed down the road, took my flashlight, and started walking. Gravel crunched under my boots. The woods pressed close on both sides, branches swaying even though there wasn't much wind. My breath fogged in the cold, drifting away from me like smoke. I walked slow, listening to the sound of my own steps. That steady rhythm kept me calm. Left, right, like a heartbeat outside my body. But after a minute, I noticed something. The sound didn't quite match. It was faint at first, like maybe I'd stepped on an echo. But the longer I listened, the more certain I became. There were extra steps, not behind me. Not ahead, alongside me, I froze. The night grew still, my breath loud in the silence. I swung my flashlight toward the woods. Nothing. Just the gray trunks of the trees, stretching back forever. I turned the light across the road, scanning the other side. Empty. Finally, I aimed it down at the ground, and that's when I saw it. My shadow, long, stretched out on the gravel just like it should have been. But it wasn't right. I was standing still, completely still, and the shadow kept walking. I can't explain the feeling that went through me. My chest went tight, like my body wanted to lock up and collapse all at once. I lifted one hand, slow, trembling, raising the flashlight higher. The shadow didn't follow. It just kept walking down the road, each step heavy, each movement steady, like it had somewhere to be. I wanted to run. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to turn and get back to the cruiser. But I couldn't. My feet felt nailed to the ground. I finally forced myself to move, taking one step backward, and the shadow stopped. It didn't look back. It didn't turn toward me. It just froze mid-step, like it was waiting. I whispered, "No." I don't even know why. It wasn't like I expected it to answer, but as soon as the word left my mouth, the shadow bent. The legs that had been frozen mid-stride shifted slowly, carefully, until it stood exactly the way I did, still, hands at my sides. Head bowed just slightly, but it didn't feel like mimicry. It felt like a game, like it wanted me to notice. I backed up again. Another step, then another, and the shadow followed, late. Not in sync, always a beat behind, like it was letting me go just far enough before reminding me it was still there. I forced myself to breathe, slow and even. I told myself it had to be something simple, a trick of the light, my mind playing games in the dark. But deep down, I knew better. I turned and walked fast toward the cruiser. The gravel crunched under my boots, my pulse thudding in my ears. I didn't dare look down. I didn't want to see if it was following, but I didn't need to. I could feel it. Every step I took, there was a weight beside me. Not behind, not ahead, beside. By the time I reached the cruiser, my hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped the keys. I yanked the door open, climbed in, and slammed it shut. The headlights were still cutting down the road. The beam was clear, steady, reaching out through the dark. But in that light, cast long across the gravel, I saw two shadows. Mine, and the other one? It wasn't touching the cruiser. It wasn't connected to me anymore. It stood just beyond the reach of the headlights. Still. Watching. I couldn't see a face. Couldn't make out details. Just that long human shape. But I knew it was mine, or at least it used to be. I started the engine. My hands clenched the wheel, knuckles white. The cruiser rumbled under me, the headlights shaking with the vibration. And then, the shadow smiled. I swear to God it did. Not with lips or teeth, but the whole shape of it curved, the head tilting, the shoulders hunching like it was laughing at me. I floored it. Gravel sprayed behind the tires as I shot down the road, the trees blurring past. I didn't look back. Not once. By the time I reached town, my heart was still hammering. My skin was cold, slick with sweat. I parked under the harsh yellow glow of the office lights and sat there, engine idling, staring at my hands on the wheel. They were shaking, and when I finally forced myself to glance out the window, I saw my shadow cast on the pavement beside the cruiser, perfectly normal, perfectly in step, like nothing had happened. But I know better. That thing out there, it wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't in my head. It was me, and it wasn't walking with me anymore. It was walking alone. There's something I need to admit. Ever since that night on the gravel road, I've been afraid of stopping, not because of what's out there in the woods, not because of the silence that presses in when the engine cuts off, but because of what happens when I do, when I stand still, and it doesn't. I tried to tell myself it was just exhaustion, my mind making shapes out of nothing. A cop alone on night patrol is bound to see things sometimes. That's what I told myself, but the fear stayed with me. The kind of fear that makes you check your reflection twice, makes you hesitate before looking down at your own feet. I couldn't shake the memory of that shadow walking beside me, like it had every right to, and I couldn't forget the way it smiled without a face. After that night, I started to notice little things, small, almost meaningless moments that made my skin crawl. I'd be leaning against the cruiser, drinking coffee from a paper cup, and the shadow on the ground wouldn't be holding the cup. Or I'd be walking down the hallway at the station, fluorescent lights buzzing above, and when I turned the corner, my shadow would turn a split second late, always lagging. It was subtle enough that no one else would notice, but I noticed, and the longer it went on, the more I realized something I didn't want to believe. It wasn't following me, it was watching me. That truth sunk in slow, heavy as stone. I caught it staring when I least expected it. Not moving, just standing in place, stretched long against the pavement or the wall, head cocked ever so slightly like it was studying me. And every time I stopped, every time I froze hoping it would match me again, it didn't. It lingered. It lingered like it had all the time in the world. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. The air was cold and sharp, the sky swollen with clouds. I was running a routine sweep near the cemetery, headlights sweeping over the iron gate as I slowed. I parked on the shoulder, killed the engine, and got out to stretch my legs. The silence was instant, pressing against my ears. The streetlight on the corner glowed weak and yellow, casting my shadow long across the cracked pavement. I stood still, and it didn't. The shadow took 3 more steps before stopping. Its head tilted, shoulders rolling slightly as though adjusting itself. Then it just waited. I swear it was staring at me. The hairs on my arms prickled. My chest grew tight. I whispered, "Why are you doing this?" The words came out cracked, half breath, half prayer. And then I saw it shift. Slow, deliberate. It raised its hand, but not like I had. Not a wave. It lifted its arm straight out, pointing at me. My knees went weak. My throat turned dry. I stepped back instinctively, and when I did, the shadow bent its head low, almost bowing. And then it stepped backward too, into me. I don't know how else to explain it. It merged with me. For one awful second, I felt it slide across my skin like a second layer. Cold, weightless, heavy all at once. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred at the edges, spots dancing in my eyes, and then it was gone. Just me again. Just one shadow. But from that night on, I haven't trusted what I see, because when I move now, sometimes the shadow doesn't just follow late. Sometimes it waits for me to stop, so it can take the lead. The first time it happened, I was in the locker room at the station. The overhead lights were humming, the tiles stained and yellowed with age. I bent to tie my boot, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the shadow straighten before I did. I froze, laces half tied. My head snapped toward the wall, and for a split second I swear I saw it standing there upright, watching me while I crouched on the bench. I couldn't move. My hands trembled against the leather of my boots. Then the light flickered, and it snapped back in place. But the image stayed burned into me. It wasn't mine anymore. It was choosing when to linger, choosing when to lead, and worse, choosing when to stop. I've noticed something else too. Something I didn't want to admit. It's not just watching me. It's waiting. Every time it lingers behind, every time it stares at me from the ground, I get the same feeling, that it's testing me, that it's waiting for the right moment to switch. That thought keeps me up at night. I'll sit in my kitchen long after midnight, the only light a dim lamp, staring down at the floor where the shadow falls at my feet. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I see its head turn, not with mine, not in sync, but separate. As though it's reminding me that when the time comes, it won't be me watching my shadow anymore. It'll be my shadow watching me. And maybe then, it won't be satisfied with standing in place. Maybe then, it'll step forward, and I'll be the one left behind. I didn't tell anyone what I saw that night. How could I? A sheriff saying his shadow isn't acting right. It sounds insane. People trust me to carry a gun, to make life and death calls. If I admitted I was afraid of my own reflection on the ground, they'd say I wasn't fit for the job, so I kept it to myself. But silence doesn't make things go away. If anything, it makes them louder. I noticed it again the very next night. I was walking the length of Main Street after hours, the town quiet, every shop window dark. My boots struck the pavement steady, my flashlight beam swinging left to right. It should have felt routine, but I couldn't stop glancing down. That shadow was stretched beside me under the glow of the streetlights. But it wasn't walking like I was. My stride was even, measured. Its steps lagged, dragging. Sometimes its arms swung slower than mine, or not at all. I told myself it was the angle, just the way the light bent across the sidewalk. Then I stopped moving, my boots planted. My breath fogged out white, and the shadow didn't stop. It took 2 more steps before pausing a little ahead of me, like it was eager to lead. That was the first time I realized it wasn't tied to me anymore. Something about it had broken loose. I remember whispering, "No, this isn't real." But my voice didn't even sound like mine. The shadow lingered there, just standing, its head tilted slightly like it was listening. My stomach turned cold. I stepped backward, but the shadow didn't follow. It stayed where it was, frozen in place, like it was waiting for something from me. I kept backing up until the streetlight shifted and the shape finally blurred into darkness. Only then did I breathe again. But after that night, I couldn't escape it. Everywhere I went, it followed, and it watched. At the diner, I sat in my usual booth, drinking black coffee. The morning sun cut across the linoleum floor, casting everything in sharp contrast. I lifted the cup, but the shadow's hand stayed down. I froze mid-sip, staring at the floor. It just sat there, motionless, while I drank. At the station, I walked down the hall, the fluorescent buzz rattling above. My boots thudded against the old wood. I turned the corner, and a split second later, my shadow turned too, delayed, like it hadn't made up its mind yet. I wanted to scream at it. But how do you yell at something no one else can see? I kept pretending, kept doing my job, but inside, I felt myself splitting. Every call, every routine stop. I wondered if people could see it too. If they noticed the way it lingered, the way it trailed behind me like it wasn't mine at all. But they didn't. Only me. And I started to think that maybe it wanted it that way. The worst night came a week later. The air was damp, heavy with fog. I parked the cruiser near the old cemetery to stretch my legs. The iron gates stood crooked, shadows spilling across the ground under the weak streetlight. I got out, shut the door, and stood still. That's when I saw it. The shadow didn't stop with me. It walked 3 more paces, then turned to face me. I swear my heart stopped. It stood there, upright, chest squared to mine, head tilted, like we were finally face to face. My hand went to my belt, fingers brushing the cold grip of my gun. Not to use it, just to feel something solid, something real. I whispered, "What do you want?" The shadow raised its arm, slow, deliberate, not in sync with me. It pointed at me. My stomach dropped. My knees weakened. I stumbled back a step, but it stayed where it was. Then, without warning, it leaned forward. Not like a person moves, more like a liquid pouring, like black water spilling toward me. And before I could breathe, it snapped back, sliding into me. For a single second, I felt it. Cold against my skin, a weight pressing from all sides. Not heavy in the body, heavy in the soul. Like it was draped over me, testing the fit. I gasped, and the world tilted. My vision blurred. The streetlight above hummed louder, almost deafening, and then, gone. Just me again. Just one shadow, but it didn't feel the same. From that night on, I wasn't sure who was leading anymore. The first real proof came in the locker room at the station. The tiles were cracked, the smell of bleach and sweat heavy in the air. I sat on the bench, bent over to tie my boot. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the shadow. It was standing upright, while I was bent low. I froze, laces hanging loose in my hands. My head whipped to the side. And in that flicker of a moment, before the overhead light buzzed and steadied, I swear it was staring down at me. I felt like prey. When the light settled, the shadow was back where it belonged, crouched like me. But I couldn't shake the image. It was practicing switching places. I started avoiding mirrors after that. Even the reflection in a window made me nervous. Because sometimes, when I walked past glass at night, I saw it move differently. A step slower, or a step quicker, like it was choosing its own pace. I stopped trusting the floor beneath me, too. When I stood under a lamp, I never looked down. I didn't want to know if it was lingering again. Waiting, plotting. I know how this sounds. Like madness. But I can feel it. It's not bound to me anymore. It's learning, and it's patient. Every night, I lie awake staring at the ceiling, afraid to turn on the lamp, afraid to see it stretched across the wall, standing when I'm lying down, pointing when I'm helpless because I know what it wants. It's not satisfied with following me, not anymore. It wants to take the lead, and one day it will, maybe it'll be subtle. I'll blink, and I'll see my hands move before I command them. Or I'll smile without meaning to, or maybe it'll be sudden. I'll stop walking and my body won't, and when that happens, when it finally switches places, I don't think I'll be the one standing in the light anymore. I think I'll be the one stuck underneath, pressed flat against the ground, staring up, silent, screaming inside, and it'll be me watching while it lives. The cemetery sits on the edge of town, tucked back against a stretch of woods that never seems to end. Folks around here don't talk about it much, not because they're scared, but because it feels wrong to mention it, like saying its name might draw something out. I've been sheriff long enough to know the stories. Kids daring each other to climb the gates at night. Teenagers sneaking in to drink, only to come running back out swearing they heard whispers between the gravestones. Old-timers muttering about shadows that move where they shouldn't. But me? I never put stock in that kind of thing. Not until the night I saw the cabin light. The caretaker's cabin has been abandoned longer than I've been alive. It sits at the far end of the cemetery, right where the ground slopes down toward the tree line. My dad used to tell me the man who lived there, old George Miller, was more of a hermit than a caretaker. People said he kept to himself, spoke to the dead more than the living. And then, one day, he just vanished. They found his boots by the porch steps, but never found him. The cabin's been empty since, or it should have been. It was just past midnight when I drove past the cemetery gates. I like to patrol that stretch sometimes. Keeps the high schoolers from thinking it's a good spot to hang around. The night was quiet, my headlights bouncing across the crooked iron fence. and that's when I saw it. A faint glow, down at the far end. At first, I thought it was the moon catching on the cabin's windows. But the moon was hidden behind clouds, and this light was steady, soft, almost golden like lamplight. I pulled over without thinking. I shouldn't have. Every part of me knew better. But my job makes curiosity feel like duty. You see something strange, you check it out. That's the rule. So I killed the engine, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out into the cold. The gravel crunched under my boots as I pushed through the gate. The hinges groaned, echoing louder than they should have in the still air. The path wound past the gravestones, some leaning so far they looked ready to topple. My flashlight beam cut through the fog creeping low across the ground. I told myself it was just kids again. Maybe they'd broken into the cabin, set up a lantern inside. I pictured them laughing, waiting for me to barge in. But the closer I got, the less it felt like a prank. The light didn't flicker like a candle or lamp. It glowed steady even, almost alive. When I reached the slope, I stopped to catch my breath. The cabin sat below me, small and squat, its roof sagging in the middle. Every window was dark except one, the front window glowing soft as a heartbeat. And there was no sound. No voices, no movement, just that light. My throat tightened. I thought about calling it in, but what would I even say? Possible trespassers in a house that shouldn't have electricity? I'd be laughed at, so I went down alone. The grass was wet with dew clinging to my boots. I could smell the rot of damp wood as I got closer. My flashlight shook in my hand, though I told myself it was just the cold. I stopped a few feet from the porch. The boards were warped, black with age. The door hung slightly open, though I didn't remember it being that way, and then I saw movement. Not outside. Inside the glow of the cabin. Just a flicker, quick as a blink. A shape passing by the window. My mouth went dry. I lifted the flashlight, aiming it through the glass. But the second the beam hit, the light inside went out. The cabin sank into darkness so complete it made my stomach twist. I stood frozen, waiting for the sound of footsteps, laughter, anything. But the silence pressed harder, thick and absolute. Finally, I forced myself forward. Each step on the porch groaned loud enough to wake the dead. The air smelled of mildew and something sharper, metallic like rust. I pushed the door open with the edge of my boot. The beam of my flashlight cut through the cabin. The place was bare, dust thick on every surface, cobwebs hanging like curtains. No lamp, no lantern, no sign of anyone. But the strangest part, the air was warm, not just warmer than outside. It felt lived in, like a stove had been burning only minutes ago. I swept the room again, my pulse hammering in my ears. And that's when I saw them. Boot prints. Faint, but clear in the dust across the floor, leading from the doorway to the center of the room. And then, stopping, as if whoever left them had just vanished into thin air. I crouched down, running my fingers over the marks. They were fresh. Too fresh, I whispered. Hello? My voice cracked in the stillness. Nothing answered. But then, I swear to God, I heard something. Not loud. Not clear. Just the faintest sound. Like breathing. Coming from the far corner of the room. I swung the flashlight toward it. My heart climbing into my throat. But the beam only lit empty boards and shadows. I stayed there too long. Crouched. Listening to my own pulse. The breathing stopped. Or maybe it was never there. Either way, I couldn't take it anymore. I backed out step by step, keeping the light steady on that corner. When I reached the porch, I didn't run. I walked, calm, slow, measured. My father always told me, panic makes you sloppy, and sloppy gets you killed. I didn't turn off my flashlight until I was back at the cruiser. My hands shook so hard, it took me 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. When the engine roared to life, I looked back one last time, and my stomach dropped. The light was back on. Soft, golden, glowing steady in that window, like it had never gone out at all. I drove away faster than I should have, tires spitting gravel as the cemetery shrank in the rearview mirror. That night, I didn't sleep, and I knew, deep down, I'd have to go back, because whatever was in that cabin, it wasn't finished with me yet. I told myself I wasn't going back. After what I saw in that cabin, the light flicking out, the footprints in the dust, the glow returning the second I left, I swore I'd keep my distance. I even drove the long way around the cemetery for a week, just so I wouldn't have to see it. But the thing about fear is, it doesn't fade. It festers. It scratches at you when you're alone, whispering questions you don't want to answer. By the fourth night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go back. It was late, same as before. Clouds smothered the moon, and the air carried that heavy stillness that comes before a storm. My cruiser's headlights swept over the iron fence as I pulled up. And there it was again, the cabin, dark and rotting at the edge of the slope. Except this time, there was no glow in the window. That almost made it worse. I told myself I was in control this time. That I'd go in, take a quick look around, and put an end to whatever stupid prank or trespasser had been screwing with me. But in my gut, I knew better. The cabin was waiting. The door hung half open just like before. My flashlight cut through the dust as I stepped inside. The air was still warm, unnaturally so. Like the place carried its own heartbeat. That's when I noticed the desk. I'd swear it hadn't been there the first time. A small wooden desk tucked against the far wall. The surface was bare except for one thing, a book. Not a thin notebook or journal. A ledger, thick, heavy, bound in cracked leather that looked older than the cabin itself. I froze in the doorway, staring at it. My flashlight caught the edges of the cover, and for a second I thought I saw it glisten, like it was damp. But when I stepped closer, it was dry. I shouldn't have touched it. Every part of me screamed to leave it alone. But my hands moved on their own. The leather was warm against my palms. I opened it. The first page was written in neat black ink. A date at the top, a name beneath it. Then another, and another. Each line the same. Date, name, date, name. It didn't take me long to realize what I was looking at. It was a burial record. Every entry matched someone I knew from town. People buried in this cemetery. Old names, familiar names, men and women I'd seen lowered into the ground over the years, some going back generations. Page after page, the names stretched on. My chest tightened as I flipped faster, the paper dry and brittle under my fingers. Every death in this town, recorded in that book, down to the day, and then something worse. I reached the middle and froze. The dates weren't in the past anymore. They were in the future. At first I thought it was a mistake, but the handwriting never wavered. The names kept coming, written with the same steady hand. I whispered some of them out loud, my voice trembling. Names of people still alive. Folks I'd seen earlier that very week. One of them was a deputy of mine. Another was the clerk who ran the diner. Even kids, teenagers, people who had no business being in a book of the dead, and next to each name, dates. Exact dates. My stomach turned. I flipped further, my breath ragged. Each page reached farther into the future. Names upon names like the town was being swallowed whole. And then I saw my own. My name, written in the same black ink, and beside it, a date. Not far off, I felt the blood drain from my face. My flashlight trembled, the beam dancing across the cabin walls. I wanted to rip the page out, to tear the book apart, but my hands wouldn't move. It felt like the air itself was holding me in place. The cabin seemed to hum, a low vibration running through the floorboards. My ears rang with it. My chest ached like something was pressing down on me. I forced myself to shut the ledger. The sound stopped just like that. But when I looked down, the cover was different. The leather was darker, wet again, like it had been dipped in fresh ink or blood. I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. I had to get out. I bolted through the door, down the porch steps, across the wet grass. The cabin loomed behind me, but I didn't look back. Not until I reached the cruiser. I slammed the door, locked it, and started the engine. But before I drove off, I made the mistake of glancing at the window. The light was on again. And this time, I could see the ledger sitting on the desk, glowing faintly in the golden glow like it was waiting for me. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel until my knuckles went white. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. How could I explain it without sounding insane? But I couldn't get it out of my head. The names, the dates, my own, and something even worse gnawed at me. I didn't just see. names of people I knew. I saw names I didn't, strangers, dozens of them, people I've never met. And their dates were soon. Too soon, like they were coming. Here, like they were coming to be buried. And the cabin. Already knew. I shouldn't have gone back, but I did. I couldn't. Stop thinking about the ledger, the names, the dates, my name, staring back at me from the pages like a promise I didn't want to keep. That cabin wasn't just a relic. It wasn't just an abandoned building tucked behind a cemetery. It was alive, or it wanted to be, and it had a plan. And I was part of it. The night I returned, the fog was thicker than I'd ever seen it. It rolled down from the hills, wrapping around the cemetery and curling into the streets. My cruiser creaked as I parked, the tires crunching over gravel that had settled like dust over forgotten bones. I didn't even wait for the engine to cool. I grabbed the flashlight and ran, boots slapping against the uneven ground, toward the cabin that had already been waiting for me. The porch steps groaned under my weight. The door hung open, inviting me. I swear it was waiting, like it knew I'd come back, like it had been counting on it. Inside, the air was warm again, too warm. The smell of old wood and mildew was there, but beneath it, something else. Something metallic, sharp, and almost sweet. I couldn't place it, and that made it worse. I didn't hesitate. I went straight for the desk. The ledger was there. Thick, dark leather, edges worn and frayed. And when I opened it, I felt it, not a feeling in my chest. Something deeper. Something in my bones. The pages were heavy in my hands, almost like they had weight beyond paper. I flipped through the entries, page after page, each name a life, each date a certainty. I had memorized the earlier pages during my first visit. Each name matched someone in the town. Friends, strangers, innocents. I had stared at my own name too, near the middle, and shivered as if touching it could summon the end itself. But tonight, I went further. I flipped to the last page and froze. There it was. My name, written in the same precise black ink. Beside it, a date. Not a vague mark. Not some hazy line in the future. The exact day. The exact hour. I could feel my heart hammering, each beat echoing through my skull. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the ledger. My mouth went dry and my knees threatened to give out. I whispered it. My own name. I'm not ready. The cabin didn't answer. But I knew it could. The warmth in the air seemed to pulse, like it was breathing with me. Or maybe at me. I turned the page. Nothing. Blank. And that's when I realized it didn't need more names. Mine was enough. The ledger didn't just record the dead. It predicted them. Marked them. And now it had marked me. I slammed the ledger shut and stumbled back. My flashlight trembled, casting jittering shadows across the walls. Every corner of the cabin seemed darker than it had before, corners that hadn't existed before, edges that reached further into the room than they should. I tried to leave. I really did. But the cabin wouldn't let me. The door wasn't open anymore. It wasn't closed. It was something else. A shape. A barrier. The wood itself seemed to warp, pressing against me, bending around me. My hands pushed, my feet staggered, and still it held. The air grew heavier. My lungs burned. I gasped for breath, trying to steady myself. And then I saw it. A figure, pale and thin, stepped from the shadows of the corner. Not a person. Not exactly. Not human. But wearing the shape of one. It moved like smoke, but it was solid. And it had my face. It smiled. Not a real smile. Not something warm or human, but a smile. Perfectly mine. I fell back, tripping over the floorboards, scrambling for the door that no longer existed. The figure, or whatever it was, glided forward, silent, watching, observing every frantic movement. And I knew it wasn't me. Not yet, but it could be. I tried to scream. Only a rasp came out. My throat burned. The figure raised a hand, my hand, and pointed at me. Not accusing, not threatening, just pointing, waiting for me to understand. The room felt smaller, the shadows closing in. The cabin was alive, breathing, The walls creaked, the floor shifted, and everywhere I looked, the ledger waited. Opened again, even though I hadn't touched it. Its pages turned to the last entry. My entry. I dropped the flashlight. The beam swung wildly, illuminating corners of the cabin I didn't know existed. Every shadow seemed alive. Every crack in the wall was a mouth. Every floorboard a heartbeat. And then I saw it. My shadow. I shouldn't have seen it. I was standing still. I shouldn't have moved. But there it was. Dark, long, warped. And it wasn't following me. It was leading. It stretched toward the door, or where the door should be, pulling, dragging, inviting me forward. But I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the floor. My mind screamed. My body refused to obey. The figure stepped closer. Its face, my face, twisted into something that shouldn't exist. Something alive and dead at the same time. Its lips moved, silently. But I understood. Your time is coming. Not a threat. A fact. I stumbled backward. My hands grasped at the walls. Dust and decay fell into my hair and eyes. My vision blurred, and then I realized. The cabin wasn't just waiting for me. It was preparing me. Every page in that ledger. Every name. Every date. All of them were warnings. Lessons. Steps leading to this moment. And I was at the final step. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, watching the figure imitate me perfectly. But when I finally forced my legs to move, when I turned to flee, the cabin shifted again. The walls warped. The door was gone. The window vanished. I was trapped. And then I understood something I didn't want to know. I wasn't the first to reach the last page. I wouldn't be the last. The ledger wasn't a book. It was a chain, a path. And mine was the next link. I tried to scream. I tried to run. But the figure moved faster than I could think, gliding toward me, perfectly mirroring my every move. And that's when I saw it, reflected faintly in the dark corner behind it. The ledger, open. My name written in black ink, perfectly neat. The last line simply read, "Time's up." I bolted, lunging at the nearest wall, hoping for the door. My hand slammed against something soft, then cold. The figure was gone. The cabin was empty. But the air was still warm, still breathing, still waiting, and in the back of my mind, I could hear it. A soft, deliberate whisper, perfectly in my own voice. "Your turn." I ran until I couldn't feel the cold gravel under my boots. I didn't stop until I reached the cruiser, heart hammering, lungs on fire. I don't know how long I sat there, gripping the wheel, staring at the cabin through the windshield. When I finally drove away, the fog seemed to follow me, curling around the cruiser, seeping into the air like smoke. And I knew. I had seen the last page. I had read my own name. I had no choice. I had been on the graveyard shift long enough to believe I'd seen most of what the town had to offer in the dead of night. Broken fences, vandals, stray dogs wandering among the tombstones, drunks sneaking in to piss on a headstone. Nothing had ever fazed me. Not really. Not until that night. It was 3 a.m, the kind of hour where even your own shadow feels like it belongs to someone else. The fog had rolled in thick, hanging low over the cemetery, smothering the tops of the gravestones and turning the tree line into a dark blur. My cruiser idled along the narrow gravel road that cut through the older section. The beams from my headlights were weak, struggling to pierce the mist, and every time I slowed down, the silence felt heavier. That's when I heard it. Hymns, soft, faint at first, barely a whisper over the hum of the engine. I stopped, cut the engine. My ears strained, trying to place the sound. It was coming from the chapel, the small stone building at the far edge of the cemetery, the one that had been locked tight for decades. I hadn't been inside since I was a kid, dared there by my friends. It had always been dark and empty, smelling of dust and old wood, its pews rotting quietly in the gloom. Now, it was alive. The singing was low, mournful, almost beautiful, but it carried a weight that pressed down on my chest. Candlelight flickered through the chapel windows, far too bright for a building supposedly abandoned. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I was seeing things. But I wasn't. I stepped out of the cruiser, boots crunching on gravel, fog curling around my ankles. The closer I got, the clearer the sound became. Voices, dozens of them, joining in a hymn I couldn't quite recognize. The words were ancient, foreign, and somehow familiar. They rolled over me like a tide, filling the spaces between the gravestones, the spaces inside my chest. I reached the steps of the chapel. The candles glowed warm and steady, though there was no wind to stir them. The fog wrapped around the building like it was breathing. My hand hovered over the door, hesitant, as every instinct screamed at me to leave. But I couldn't. I had to know. I pushed open the door. The smell hit me first. Incense, wax, and something coppery, like blood. My stomach lurched. My flashlight followed the candlelight inside, illuminating pews polished to a dull shine. The floorboards were clean, no dust, no decay. But there were no bodies, no priests, no organist, no one. Yet the voices continued. I froze in the doorway. Then I saw them. Figures, sitting in the pews, faint and blurred at the edges like smoke, glowing softly in the candlelight. They weren't solid, not completely. But they were there. Mothers, fathers, children. Some dressed in funeral clothes I'd only seen in old photographs. Their heads bowed in prayer, hands clasped. Their mouths moved in sync with the hymn, though when I tried to hear it with my own ears, all I got was the echo in my skull. I swallowed hard. Every nerve in my body screamed, but I couldn't move. And then the music changed. The hymn slowed, deepened, and a sense of expectation settled over the chapel. My chest tightened, and I realized I was holding my breath. I shouldn't have been here. I knew that. But the air, it was heavy with something I couldn't name. A presence, watching, waiting. I stepped forward. The figures didn't notice me. They never did. They were locked in that silent service, faces glowing in the candlelight, oblivious to the living world. And then I saw it. A coffin at the front of the chapel. Polished wood, dark as the night outside, candlelight reflecting off its surface. No one was near it. No hands, no pallbearers, yet the energy in the room, the voices, seemed to converge there, almost reverent, almost fearful. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. But curiosity gripped me. It had me by the throat. I took another step closer, and my boots echoed too loudly in the stillness. The figures flinched slightly, not at the sound, but as if my presence had bent the fabric of their ritual. The candlelight flickered. I noticed the air, cold pockets pressing against my skin, curling up my sleeves, making the hairs on my neck stand. I felt eyes on me, though no one had turned. The shadows at the edges of the chapel stretched longer, leaning, bending. Then I heard it. Not the hymn this time, but a whisper, a soft voice, just at the edge of hearing, saying my name. I froze. The whispers grew louder, joining the hymn now, overlapping, calling, coaxing. I could feel the floor beneath me hum, like the chapel itself was alive, resonating with my heartbeat. I looked at the coffin. The lid. It shifted. A slow, deliberate movement. Not enough to see inside, but enough to know it was moving. I stepped back, tripping over a pew. The figures didn't react. The light didn't flicker. Only the coffin moved ever so slightly, as though whatever was inside knew I was watching. I backed toward the door, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light. My mind playing games, fog in my eyes, fatigue from the long shift. But I knew better. The air changed. Warmer, heavier, closer. I could feel it pressing against my chest. I could smell it now. Earth, decay, something older than the cemetery itself. The hymn slowed again. The words stretched unnaturally. Every head in the pews turned, not toward me but toward the coffin. The candlelight flickered, shadows dancing across the walls like living things. I wanted to leave. God, I wanted to leave. But my legs refused. They were rooted to the floor. My flashlight slipped from my hands, bouncing along the polished boards, casting wide beams of trembling light across the room. The coffin's lid lifted, slowly. A figure sat upright inside, shrouded in shadow, face hidden. And then, oh God, its eyes opened. Black, hollow, yet somehow knowing. Looking at me, I stumbled back. My breath caught. My hands pressed to my mouth. My knees almost buckled under me. The hymn stopped. Silence crashed down like a wave, thick and suffocating. The candlelight dimmed, flickered, and then returned, brighter than before. The figure remained, motionless, waiting. And I realized something I hadn't before. The chapel wasn't abandoned. The service hadn't ended decades ago. It had never ended. Every night the dead gathered. Every night they waited. Not for the living, not for the curious, not for me, but for something else. Something that had yet to arrive. And somehow, I was part of it. The coffin shifted again. A hand emerged, skeletal, gloved in shadow, reaching, not toward the ceiling, not toward the door, but toward me. I turned and ran, crashing through the pews, tripping over bodies that weren't there or maybe had been, and burst through the door into the foggy night. My boots sank into the wet ground as I ran toward the cruiser, heart hammering, lungs burning. When I reached it, I dared a glance back. The chapel was empty again. No candlelight, no hymn, no coffin, no figures. Only darkness, thick and oppressive, stretching across the cemetery like a promise. I drove away, tires skimming over gravel, fog swallowing my headlights. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of town, and even then I didn't get out of the cruiser. I sat there breathing, shaking, staring at the road that led back to that chapel. I knew I would have to return, because whatever I had seen, whatever had called my name, it wasn't finished. Not yet. And I had a feeling the night service was only just beginning. I didn't sleep after the first night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the chapel, the candlelight, the coffin. I heard the hymn looping in my head, low and insistent, like a heartbeat pressed against my skull. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of exhaustion, of late-night patrols and fogged-up headlights, but the memory wouldn't leave. By the second night, I was back. I parked at the gravel road leading to the chapel, engine idling, fog curling around the cruiser like it had weight. The air smelled damp, earthy, like the cemetery itself was breathing. My flashlight was clutched in my hand, trembling slightly. I told myself I was prepared this time, that I'd be rational, cautious. But I knew I wasn't, not really. The door to the chapel was open just like before. Warm candlelight spilled out into the fog, inviting and menacing all at once. I stepped forward, boots crunching on the gravel, heart hammering, every nerve alert. Inside, the hymn was already underway. Low, mournful, vibrating through the walls. It wasn't the melody I remembered. It was slower, heavier, carrying a weight I could feel pressing on my shoulders. And then I saw them. Rows upon rows of figures sat in the pews. Dozens, maybe hundreds, their faces pale, almost translucent, eyes closed in solemn devotion. Their clothes were dark, some ragged, some neat, outdated by decades. Their heads were bowed in prayer, or maybe in waiting. I froze in the doorway. My flashlight trembled, spilling light across the chapel, illuminating faces I'd never seen. None of them looked alive. Not really. Their skin had a waxy sheen, like old photographs left in sunlight too long. Their hands were clasped in their laps, rigid, unnervingly still. I wanted to speak, to call out, but the sound stuck in my throat. And then I noticed something worse. None of them acknowledged me. Not a blink, not a twitch, not even a twitch of recognition. They were unmoving in their devotion, or in their obedience. I stepped further inside, hesitant, and the floorboards groaned beneath me. Immediately a chill rose, curling around my spine. The figures shifted, not their bodies, but the weight of them. Like the air itself had moved with my steps. I swallowed hard. I had seen ghosts before on patrol, drunk kids, illusions, the kind of things that fade when you blink. But this was different. The room felt alive, breathing, holding me in place. The candlelight flickered, and the shadows stretched long across the walls, reaching for me like fingers. I focused on the coffin at the front. Its polished wood gleamed in the candlelight untouched. No one sat beside it. No pallbearers, no priest, no organist. And yet, the figures in the pews seemed to revolve around it, as though it were the center of their universe. I whispered, "Hello?" My voice cracked, no response. The hymn slowed. The voices softened, almost anticipating my words. The air thickened, and then faintly I could hear murmurs, not from the figures, but beneath them. Like the floor itself whispered secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I moved closer to the first row, stepping carefully, flashlight trembling. I could see the faces clearly now. They weren't faces I recognized. None of them were alive. Not people I'd known, not anyone from the town. Their expressions were serene, content even, but hollow. The eyes, though closed, seemed to see everything. The skin was pallid, unblemished, too perfect for corpses, too cold for the living. I stumbled back. My heartbeat spiked, and I realized the pews extended further than I remembered, disappearing into shadow. The figures continued sitting, row after row, perfectly aligned, perfectly still. I noticed their hands. Not all of them were clasped. Some rested unnaturally on the pews, fingers bent at impossible angles. Some reached toward the coffin without moving. Some almost floated. I whispered again, my voice barely audible. Who are you?" The hymn didn't stop, but a faint murmur rose beneath it, as if the figures themselves were responding in a language I didn't understand. My stomach churned. The fog outside seemed to seep in through the walls, curling around my legs, climbing my boots. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. Every figure was focused on the coffin, all of them. Every breath they took, or didn't take, was a reminder I didn't belong here. I realized then what made it worse. I was supposed to be part of the congregation. Not as an observer, not as a witness, part of it. I tried to step back, but my boots felt glued to the floor. The candlelight flickered again, and I could swear I saw movement in the shadows behind the pews. Just a twitch, a shift, a glance. Not human, not alive, but aware, watching, waiting. I could hear it then. A faint whisper. My name. I tried to spin, to run, to leave, but the rows of figures seemed to stretch farther than the walls would allow, their faces turning in unison, shadows leaning toward me, hands twitching. The hymn swelled again, louder, vibrating through the floorboards, through my bones. I forced myself to breathe, deeply, slowly, and then I saw it clearly. The coffin lid lifted. Just slightly, a hand emerged, skeletal and thin, reaching, not toward the ceiling, not toward the front of the chapel, but toward me. The congregation didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't acknowledge it. Their devotion was complete, absolute. And I was an intruder. I backed away, stumbling over a pew. The figures didn't budge. Their heads didn't turn. But the air shifted. It pressed against my chest, forced me forward, toward the coffin, toward what waited. I knew then I had to leave. I had to get out. I bolted. My flashlight clattered across the floor, bouncing light across the walls. The pews stretched impossibly long, the shadows growing taller with every step. The murmurs rose to a crescendo, almost pleading, almost demanding. My boots hit the threshold, the candlelight flickering, and I stumbled out into the foggy night. I didn't look back. Not until I reached my cruiser, gasping, shaking, heart hammering. And when I did, the chapel was gone. The candlelight vanished, the hymn disappeared, the fog rolled back into nothingness. Only the cold, silent cemetery remained. I sat in the cruiser for a long time, gripping the wheel, listening to my own ragged breathing. The air was too quiet, too still. I knew I'd have to go back because the congregation hadn't noticed me leave, and I knew they were waiting. I didn't sleep again that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, the candlelight of the chapel haunted me. I saw those pale faces, unmoving, those hollow eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. I kept thinking about the coffin, the hand that had reached out, the warmth I had felt pressing against my chest as if the chapel itself was alive. I told myself I wasn't going back. I promised myself. I drove past the cemetery, headlights cutting through the fog, heart pounding. But by 2 in the morning, I found my cruiser parked along the same gravel road again. I had no plan, no justification, just a compulsion I couldn't explain. Something was calling me, and I knew I had to answer. The chapel was exactly as it had been. Open doors, candlelight flickering against the fog. The hymn, soft, mournful, drifting from inside. I stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the wet gravel. The cold cut through my uniform, but I hardly noticed. My attention was fixed on the chapel, on what waited inside. I entered. The congregation sat in the pews, countless figures lined in perfect rows, all facing forward, hands clasped. Their faces were pale, waxy, eyes closed, as if in silent prayer or in suspended animation. The air was thick, warm, and yet unbearably heavy, pressing against my chest and ribs. I moved forward, flashlight sweeping the pews, illuminating every unmoving figure. The shadows leapt from the corners of the room, crawling along the walls, flickering with the candlelight. The casket at the front, closed, polished, dark wood that gleamed in the candlelight. I froze before it, knowing instinctively that this wasn't just a coffin. This wasn't the end for someone who had already gone. This was something else. I swallowed, feeling my throat dry, tongue thick. The air smelled of incense and damp earth. My flashlight shook in my hands as I approached, every step deliberate, careful, as if the floor itself could betray me. I could hear whispers beneath the hymn now, faint, murmuring voices echoing across the walls, weaving into the melody. I leaned closer, looking for the source, and the whispers seemed to press against my ears, wrapping around my skull, calling, insisting, and then it hit me. The casket was meant for someone alive. The realization didn't come slowly. It hit with the force of cold water. I didn't need to open the lid, I knew. Somehow, deep down, I could feel the presence within. Warm, watching, waiting. I stepped closer, boots grinding softly on the wooden floor, and the whispers grew louder, pressing against me. I could feel the congregation's attention shift, not toward me, not in acknowledgement, but in anticipation. Their devotion, their stillness, their entire purpose seemed to revolve around this one closed casket. I could sense it, a focal point of something beyond comprehension, something old, patient, and hungry. My hand trembled as I reached toward the lid. I didn't want to touch it. God, I didn't want to touch it. But my body moved anyway, drawn as if by some invisible string. My fingers brushed the polished wood, cold, smooth, unyielding. The candlelight danced across its surface, shadows creeping along the edges, like tiny fingers writhing across the grain. The whispers rose into a chorus, voices overlapping, growing insistent. I realized they weren't speaking words. Not exactly. They were murmuring names. Hundreds of names, long-dead names, names that should have been forgotten, flowing into one another. And then my own name. I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat. My heart was hammering in my ears. I spun, shining my flashlight on the pews, the figures, the endless congregation. They were still, silent, watching the casket, waiting, patient, eternal. And then I saw the shadows move. Not the candlelight, not the figures, but the darkness itself. It coalesced around the edges of the casket, curling and stretching like living smoke. A hand reached out from it. Not fully formed, a shadow of a hand, skeletal, thin, yet unmistakably reaching for me. I wanted to run. I tried. But the floor seemed to ripple under my boots, stretching the distance, bending reality. Every step toward the door felt longer, heavier, as if something inside the chapel was holding me back, drawing me closer to the casket. I could feel it now. The presence inside, watching, knowing, alive. Not alive in the human sense, but aware, conscious, patient. It did not need my permission. It did not care that I existed. I was just a witness. And yet it demanded recognition. I stepped closer again, drawn irresistibly, and I saw it. Just the faintest movement beneath the closed lid. A shift, a twitch. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, overlapping with the hymn, the names, my own voice calling from somewhere inside my skull. I stumbled back, nearly falling, my flashlight clattering to the floor, light bouncing wildly. The figures didn't move. The shadows didn't waver. The lid of the casket moved slightly again, and I realized with a sickening clarity that whatever was inside, whatever it was waiting for, was alive. Alive. I took a deep breath, shaking uncontrollably, trying to force my rational mind to take over. I was a sheriff. I had seen crime scenes, accidents, bodies, horrors too human to imagine. But this was beyond anything I had known. I realized the congregation wasn't sitting there to mourn. They were guardians, witnesses, participants in a ritual older than memory. Their stillness, their devotion, their focus, it all pointed to the casket. And the entity inside, it had not been laid to rest. Not yet. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to run. My legs moved, but they felt heavier with each step, as if the floor resisted me. The whispers grew louder, names overlapping. Some I recognized from old case files, some I didn't. And all of them seemed to spiral toward me, through me, pressing into my skull. And then, silence. The candlelight flickered once. The shadows retreated slightly. The figures remained still, devoted, watching the casket. And for a brief moment I saw the lid quiver, a heartbeat, subtle but unmistakable, like the pulse of something alive. I stumbled backward, tripping over a pew, crashing to the floor. My breath came in ragged gasps. My flashlight rolled away, casting frantic light across the room. The shadows stretched, bending, curling toward me, as if the air itself had weight and intention. I scrambled to my feet, spinning toward the door. My hands fumbled with the handle. The whispers rose again, soft now, intimate, beckoning, coaxing. My name again. My full name. And then one more word, faint, barely audible. Come! I yanked the door open, stumbling into the foggy night. The cold air struck my face, my lungs burning, my heart hammering. The chapel behind me was silent. Candlelight gone, shadows gone. Just the fog, curling around the gravestones like tendrils, waiting. I sat in my cruiser for a long time, gripping the wheel, sweat and fog forming on my brow, listening to my own ragged breathing. My hands shook, my mind reeling. I knew I'd have to return. I knew I would, because the closed casket wasn't meant for someone dead. It was waiting for someone alive, and deep down I knew that someone was me. I knew it would be my last night on patrol. 32 years on the force, and I'd never felt a chill like this one. The kind of chill that isn't just in your bones, but in your chest, in your gut, in the very marrow of your spine. I was supposed to be used to the graveyard shift by now. Years of fog, of still air, of the low hum of the town sleeping while I drove its streets. But something about tonight felt off. The fog was thick, clinging to the trees like cobwebs, curling around the gravestones like fingers reaching out of the earth. My headlights cut through it in pale, trembling slices. The world seemed smaller, tighter, as if the fog itself was compressing everything, pressing it closer, closer until it felt like it might crush me. I started at the cemetery entrance, the chain-link gate creaking softly in the wind. I'd walked these grounds countless times in rain, snow, heat, and darkness, but tonight, the familiar paths felt foreign. Every headstone, every shadow, seemed heavier than usual, like they were holding memories I wasn't meant to see. I parked my cruiser and stepped out. My boots sank slightly into the damp earth. The smell of wet leaves, of decay, of soil filled my nostrils. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. My hand hovered over my flashlight, though the beam barely penetrated the thick rolling fog. I started my walk along the perimeter, checking the gates, the fences, the mausoleums. Everything seemed normal, and yet normal didn't feel right. The gravestones leaned in ways they shouldn't. Shadows pooled beneath the trees where no shadows had business being, and the air carried whispers too faint to make sense. I shook my head. It was my last shift. I couldn't let nerves or imagination get the better of me. I reminded myself of the logic. Long nights alone. overactive imagination, fog that distorted sound and sight. That was all it could be. But then I heard it, a low hum, barely audible at first, coming from somewhere deeper in the cemetery. Not music, not wind, not the distant call of an owl. Something else, a vibration in the air that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I froze, listening. My own heartbeat thundered in my ears. I told myself it was nothing. The wind through the trees, the fog moving, maybe an animal. I started walking again, flashlight scanning, every step deliberate. But the sound persisted, following me, low and insistent, like a rhythm sinking to my pulse. The graves themselves seemed aware. I know that sounds absurd. I've walked among them thousands of times. But tonight, each stone seemed to press inward, leaning slightly toward me as if listening, waiting. I stopped near a cluster of older graves, the ones dating back decades. The fog here was thicker, rolling in waves. My flashlight caught the edges of a stone, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw movement, a shadow darting between the markers. I spun the light, nothing there. Only fog, only silence. I felt my pulse quicken. 32 years on the force, and I've never felt fear like this. Not when I found bodies in fields, not when I responded to violent deaths, not when the town itself seemed to fall apart around me. This was different, cold, patient, watching. I tried to laugh it off, muttering to myself. Old bones, old eyes, last shift nerves, nothing more. But the words felt hollow. My own voice sounded strange in the heavy air, swallowed by the fog. I continued down the gravel path, flashlight sweeping the ground, my boots crunching softly. Every step echoed oddly, as if the cemetery itself was amplifying my presence. The hum grew slightly louder, a low thrum that seemed to vibrate through the soles of my boots, into my legs, up my spine. I stopped at the old caretaker's shack, empty, abandoned years ago. I knew it well. Normally the windows were dark, the doors locked. Tonight, a faint glow flickered behind the cracked panes. Candlelight, I thought, or maybe a reflection. I approached cautiously. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the fog. I shouldn't have gone in. I knew that. My brain screamed at me to turn back, to drive home, to leave the cemetery and never return. But my feet moved anyway. 32 years of habit, of duty, of instinct carried me forward. Inside, the air was warmer than outside, thick with dust and the scent of old wood. The candle flickered on a table, but no one was there. Nothing alive. Just shadows dancing against the walls. My flashlight shook in my hand. I felt it again. The sensation of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking my every move. I spun slowly, scanning the room, shining the beam into every corner. The hum was louder now, almost melodic, vibrating through the floorboards. I could feel it in my chest, in my throat, pressing on me. Something was here. Something waiting. I turned back toward the door, ready to leave, but then I froze. The fog outside shifted unnaturally. A figure appeared at the edge of the shack's window, just a silhouette, vague and indistinct, but unmistakably human, standing perfectly still, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. "Hello?" I whispered. No response. Only the fog curling around the figure, masking it, hiding it, but still present. I wanted to move. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. Fear rooted me in place, and then I heard footsteps, soft, almost imperceptible. Behind me, I spun, flashlight sweeping the room, heart hammering. Nothing. The shack was empty. The candle flickered again. The hum had shifted, now circling me, wrapping around my ears. The air pressed closer, heavier, as if the shack itself had grown smaller, enclosing me. I backed toward the door, feeling my pulse in my temples. The footsteps followed, though I saw no one. My mind raced. Exhaustion, paranoia, old age, fog, stress. That had to be it. But my gut, my instincts screamed otherwise. Something was here, watching, waiting. I burst out of the shack, gasping, fog wrapping around me like cold fingers. The figure at the edge of the window was gone. Only the gravestones remained, silent and still, the low hum fading into the distance. My boots crunched along the gravel, headlights slicing through the thick night air. I knew then that tonight would not be ordinary. Not my last shift. Not any shift. The fog wasn't just mist. The shadows weren't just absence of light. Something had stirred in the graveyard and I was in its path. I climbed back into the cruiser, hands shaking on the wheel, headlights cutting through the dense fog. The low hum seemed to follow me, wrapping around the tires, whispering in the night, echoing in the silence between the trees. I drove slowly, carefully, every sense alert. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cemetery itself had changed, that it had been waiting for me, the last sheriff, the one who had walked these grounds longer than most could remember, and now it was awake. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Fog rolled in, thick, pressing against the cruiser, swallowing the light. Shapes moved in the mist, faint, indistinct, human, but fleeting. I blinked and they were gone. I whispered to myself, trying to ground my mind. It's the last shift. Just one last patrol. Just a final walk. Nothing more. But I knew it wasn't nothing. Not tonight. Not in this fog. Not in this cemetery. Something waited. And I was the only one there to see it. I should have stayed in the cruiser. I should have driven straight home. Told myself it was over. Retirement waiting like a warm bed and quiet nights. But the fog had other plans. Thick, rolling, pressing, it had swallowed the cemetery and kept me in its grip. And then I heard it. Shovels. At first I thought it was my imagination, a trick of the fog, the distant tapping of branches or the grind of tires on gravel. But the sound persisted. Closer now, deliberate, heavy, biting into the silence of the night. Metal scraping earth. The thud of soil being thrown aside. My stomach clenched. I left the cruiser. Boots crunching on the gravel, each step deliberate, each breath rising in white clouds into the fog. My flashlight cut a narrow path through the mist, illuminating gravestones that leaned like weary sentinels, their names worn and almost illegible. But it wasn't the stones that made my blood run cold. It was the movement between them. There, just beyond the nearest row, shadows shifting with unnatural precision. My heart hammered. I raised the flashlight, scanning the ground, expecting maybe a caretaker or some late-night trespasser. Nothing. Just fog, curling in lazy swirls around the bases of the stones. And then, again, the scraping, closer now. I could hear the rhythm. Shovel digging, soil hitting soil, muffled but real. And the smell, earth turned over, wet, pungent, heavy, carrying with it something I couldn't place. Not decay, not death, something older, something patient. I moved cautiously, each step feeling heavier than the last. My mind raced. Maybe a grave robbery. That had happened in other counties. Maybe some prankster, a local kid with too much time on his hands. But instinct screamed at me, this wasn't ordinary. This wasn't human. Not entirely. I rounded a corner of the older graves, and my flashlight fell on the scene. Shovels moving in the fog, but no bodies holding them. No arms, no legs, just the shovels themselves moving with purpose, rhythm, digging graves that had been closed for decades. Soil tossed high, landing silently, almost reverently. I blinked, my flashlight shaking, wondering if exhaustion or stress had finally broken me. But no, the shovels kept moving. Graves yawned open beneath my eyes, old wooden coffins partially unearthed, lids cracked or lifted slightly, as if inviting me closer. The air around them was heavier now, almost pulsing, vibrating with each strike of metal against earth. I took a step forward and the fog shifted. A shadow, taller than any man, solid yet indistinct, moved across my path. I stumbled back, heart hammering, flashlight flickering. I tried to call out, "Hey, who's there?" But the words were swallowed by the night, the fog, the heavy rhythm of digging. And then I understood. This wasn't ordinary. Not human. Not living. These graves weren't being opened for any of the reasons I knew. This wasn't theft. This wasn't mischief. Something wanted them free. Something ancient and patient, moving the shovels, opening the dead. I swallowed, trying to ground myself. I'd seen things in my career I shouldn't have. Bodies in fields, crime scenes, accidents that left no explanation. But this was different. Cold, methodical, watching. And it was aware I was here. I took another step forward. My flashlight illuminated one of the open graves fully. The coffin inside, old, rotted at the edges, shook slightly. Wood creaked as if resisting some unseen force. Soil fell from the edges, dust clouding the air. My pulse raced. I wanted to leave. God, I wanted to leave. But my legs, like the rest of me, were trapped in a frozen fear. The shovels moved faster now, striking in unison, rhythmically, digging graves faster than any human could. I noticed the shadows at the edges of my vision, tall, dark, watching. I realized then that they weren't digging themselves. They were commanding it, instructing it, guiding it. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over a gravestone, heart hammering, mind screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had to know what was happening. I had to see. Another grave opened fully, and the lid of the coffin inside lifted slightly. Nothing came out. Nothing visible. Yet the air shifted. The fog seemed to coil and pulse, and I could feel a presence within it, patient, waiting, alive in a way that defied reason. I glanced around, shining my flashlight, and saw it. A figure, indistinct, taller than a man, swaying at the edge of the fog. No face, no features, just an impression of a presence, watching, guiding the digging. Every movement of the shovel seemed synchronized with its subtle gestures, invisible hands directing the soil, commanding the graves. I swallowed hard. My voice caught when I tried to speak. "Who? What are you?" I whispered, no answer. Just the digging and the shadows at the edges of my vision. Watching. Patient. Eternal. I backed up, tripping over roots, my boots sinking into the wet earth. The graves stretched on infinitely, a field of opened earth, coffins partially revealed. The fog swirled, obscuring distance, but I could feel the rhythm, every grave, every coffin moving in some unseen order. I realized then that I had never walked among graves like this before. Not really, not like this. Each stone, each burial was alive with intention, watching, waiting. The hum of the digging now felt like a heartbeat, low and insistent, echoing in my chest. I pressed my palms against my ears, trying to block it out, but it wouldn't stop. I was part of it now, whether I wanted to be or not. The rhythm of the shovels pulled at me, called me closer, demanded my attention. I saw movement in the soil again, subtle, almost imperceptible, coffins shifting, lids trembling. And then a hand. Not a living hand, not fully human, but a shape formed of shadow and earth, pushing against the wood, reaching out, toward me. I stumbled back, flashlight falling to the ground. Light bounced wildly across the graves, illuminating glimpses of forms I couldn't name, shapes that twisted in the fog, watching me. The presence in the shadows was closer now, its patience thinning, replaced by intent. It wanted something from me. I scrambled to my feet, gasping, heart racing, mind screaming. My flashlight rolled across the damp earth, beam cutting through the fog. I saw the hands again, crawling from the coffins, not quite alive, not quite dead, reaching toward the surface. My stomach churned, bile rising, and then the whispers. Low at first, indistinct, like wind through the trees, but growing louder, sharper, pressing into my ears. Names, hundreds of names. Some I recognized, some I didn't, and my own. My full name whispered in the rhythm of the digging, as if the graves themselves knew me, had waited for me. I turned, stumbling toward the cruiser, fog curling around my boots, soaking my uniform, dripping into my hair. The figures in the shadows at the edges of the fog moved closer, silent, deliberate, guiding the digging. And I realized with a cold certainty they weren't done. Not tonight, not while I watched. I reached the cruiser, shaking, wet, exhausted, but alive. I slammed the door, locked it, hands gripping the wheel like a lifeline. The fog rolled past, still thick, swallowing the gravel road behind me. The shovels fell silent in the distance, the whispers receding, but the presence lingered, patient, waiting, eternal. I knew I would have to return. I had to know. I had to see. The cemetery wasn't done. It would not be done until the graves were filled, or until it claimed me, and I knew deep in my bones that I wasn't ready. But it would not wait for me to be ready. I shouldn't have stayed. I knew it as soon as I stepped back into the cemetery, even as the fog curled around my boots, soaking my uniform, clinging to my skin. But I did. Some part of me, old instinct, curiosity, stubbornness, pulled me back, pulled me deeper into the night. The digging had stopped. The shovels were silent, the grave still, yet the air had changed. The hum that had pressed through my chest and stomach before was gone, replaced by a heavier, almost static weight. I could feel it before I saw it. Presence. Watching. Patient. Waiting. I moved slowly, flashlight slicing narrow beams through the fog. Each step was deliberate, cautious, as if announcing my presence might provoke something I couldn't escape. And then I saw them, figures, just at the edge of visibility, standing perfectly still in the mist. They weren't moving toward me. They weren't walking away. They were simply there, silent, patient, their forms dark against the fog, vaguely human but not quite. I couldn't make out faces, only the sense that eyes were on me, unblinking, unyielding. My throat went dry. My hands gripped the flashlight like a weapon, but the beam barely penetrated the fog to touch them. The closer I tried to move, the further they seemed to recede, drifting just beyond the reach of the light. I felt the old instinctive fear in my bones, the same that had gripped me during my first night shift decades ago. Only this was different. This wasn't fear of crime, or of accident, or of a criminal hiding behind a tree. This was primal, ancient. I tried to speak. My voice cracked. What are you? No answer, only silence. Heavy, thick, pressing against my ears. I took another step forward. The fog shifted subtly around the watchers. Their edges wavered like smoke, never solid, never fully tangible. And yet I could feel them. Weightless but heavy, silent but insistent, waiting. I blinked, and they were closer. Or maybe I was slower. My mind wavered. My flashlight flickered. The figures didn't. They just stood, patient, observing, their presence pressing against the rational part of my mind, suffocating it. I remembered every patrol I had walked alone, every empty road, every graveyard I had seen in fog and darkness. Nothing had ever been like this. Nothing. This wasn't an accident or a prank or a misstep. This was deliberate. The Watchers had chosen me. They had waited for me. My heart thudded in my chest, loud, too loud, as I took another step. I felt the shift in the fog around them like water pushed by invisible hands. I wasn't moving toward them. They were moving toward me. Slowly, patiently, silently. I swallowed hard, trying to ground myself, reminding myself that I was a sheriff. I had seen horrors, faced criminals, carried people from accidents, and handled situations that would break most men. But this was different. There was no crime, no scene, no human explanation. There was only this, the Watchers, patient, eternal, and waiting. I tried to lift my radio, to call it in, to explain it away to dispatch to myself. My fingers trembled, but the device slipped from my hands, clattering to the gravel. The sound echoed, swallowed instantly by the fog. The Watchers didn't flinch. They didn't even react, just stood, waiting, patient. A sudden gust of wind rolled through the gravestones. I thought it might have been my imagination, or the fog moving, but the Watchers shifted with it, gliding almost imperceptibly as if riding the currents of the mist itself. My pulse quickened. My mind screamed at me to run, to escape, but my legs felt rooted. Every instinct that had kept me alive on patrol for decades now mocked me, useless against whatever force this was. I took a step back, tripping over uneven ground, heart hammering. One of the Watchers moved slightly in response. Not toward me, not away, just a slight turn, almost imperceptible. The fog rippled, the air thickened, and I realized with a sick certainty that they weren't waiting for me to leave. They were waiting for something else. Something I couldn't see. My flashlight shook in my hand, light bouncing across the gravestones. I tried to focus, tried to count the Watchers, but they didn't stay put. The fog warped their forms, multiplied them, erased them, left me dizzy and disoriented. And then I heard it, not a sound, but a sense, a shift in the air, attention turning toward me. Not the fog, not the graves, me. I swallowed hard, mouth dry. Every part of me screamed to run, but the path back to the cruiser seemed longer now, distorted by fog and fear. And I knew, as clearly as I have ever known anything in my life, that if I turned my back, if I ran blindly, it wouldn't matter. They would be there, patient, waiting. I tried to speak again, voice trembling. "What do you want?" No answer, but I felt it. The pull, subtle, almost imperceptible, like a tug on the very marrow of my bones. I realized then that the Watchers weren't human. Not alive, not dead. They existed in some in-between, in the spaces where the living and the dead blurred. And they were aware, hyper-aware, of me, of every step, every heartbeat. I forced myself to move, stepping backward slowly, eyes fixed on the fog, the shadows at its edges. They didn't follow in a conventional way. They simply shifted with me, always just beyond the reach of my light, patient, eternal. The cemetery seemed endless. Gravestones stretched infinitely, lost in the fog. Every path I took seemed to loop back, every shadow deeper, more insistent. And the Watchers were always there, patient, waiting. Their presence pressed on me, shaping the fog, guiding my steps like puppeteers pulling strings I couldn't see. I thought of my retirement, of the quiet life waiting for me, of normalcy and safety. It felt like a cruel joke. Nothing I had lived for, nothing I had served for, could protect me here. The Watchers were indifferent to all that. Time, life, duty, they had no meaning. They existed beyond it, and now I was aware of them. I stumbled over another grave, gravel spilling under my boots. My flashlight bounced wildly, catching glimpses of figures at the fog's edges, closer than before, yet never advancing, never retreating. I could feel them watching my every move, calculating, judging, patient, waiting. I tried to count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, more. I couldn't tell. Fog and shadows warped them, multiplied them, erased them. Each step I took, each breath I drew was observed, and I understood then that I was alone. Truly alone, not in the sense of no one else being there, but in the sense that the Watchers were not companions, not enemies, not human. They were the space between life and death, and I had stumbled into it. A sudden movement in the fog. One Watcher shifted slightly, tilting its head, or what I assumed was a head. The rest remained still. The air grew heavier. My pulse raced, and I realized with icy certainty that they weren't waiting for me to leave. They were waiting for me to understand, or to join. I felt the pull again, stronger now, tugging at my chest, my legs, my very mind. The fog seemed alive, moving around me, shaping itself into impossible forms. Shadows stretched and warped. Gravestones leaned toward me, roots twisted like fingers. The Watchers did not move, and yet the cemetery itself had become a part of them, or they a part of it. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My throat felt tight, my lungs constricted. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet every step forward seemed to root me further. And then I saw it, a gap in the fog, a space between Watchers where the night seemed to pulse, waiting. A doorway or a promise or a trap. I couldn't tell. I swallowed hard, breath catching in my chest. I realized then that this was what the cemetery had been waiting for. Not the digging, not the fog, not the graves. Me. My attention. My fear. My awareness. I backed away slowly. Flashlight flickering. Heart hammering. Senses screaming. The Watchers remained. Patient, silent, eternal. And I knew deep in my bones that they would wait. Always. And I would remember. Always. I turned at last toward the cruiser. Fog thick around me, figures at the edge of vision. Always there, patient, waiting. The night had not ended. The cemetery had not ended. And I realized, with a cold certainty, that the Watchers would follow me home, or wherever I went, patient and silent, until I understood what it was they wanted, or until I became another shadow in the fog. The cruiser's engine had never sounded so loud. Every click of the dashboard, every vibration of the tires on gravel seemed to echo the pounding of my heart. Fog clung to the windows, muffling the world outside, and I knew, even as I gripped the wheel, that I was still inside that cemetery. Not physically, maybe, but somewhere in my mind, in the marrow of my bones, I was trapped. I wanted to leave. God, I wanted to leave. But the radio crackled before I could even turn the key fully. A single burst of static, low and heavy, pressed into my chest. Then softly at first, a voice, "Sheriff." I froze. The words stretched out in the air, wet and heavy like the fog outside. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't urgent. It was patient, expectant. My hands tightened around the wheel. Sheriff. The voice again, clearer this time. My own name, my full name, spoken not by a living human, not by the dispatch, but through the crackle and hiss of the static. My pulse jumped. My throat tightened. I tried to call back. "This is dispatch!" But the radio only hissed in reply, the static thick and oppressive, pressing against my ears, against my mind. And then, unmistakably, a single line, faint but clear. "Your grave is ready." I laughed at myself, or tried to. The sound caught in my throat. My head whipped toward the fog beyond the windshield. The cemetery wasn't there, or at least it shouldn't have been. I had driven miles from it, following instinct, following panic, trying to shake what I had seen. But the fog thickened against the headlights, curling around the cruiser, shaping itself into impossible forms. And in it, I saw a headstone. The name carved into it glimmered faintly in the fog, letters worn but unmistakable. Mine. I dropped the wheel for a moment, gripping my face, shaking my head. No, it couldn't be. Not real, not possible. But the fog didn't lie. The name was carved deep, solid, eternal, and beneath it, the soil was disturbed. Earth turned over as if freshly dug, shovels having moved silently, deliberately. I backed up a few feet, heart hammering, chest tight, sweat slicking my palms. My flashlight lay on the passenger seat, useless, against the thickness of the fog, against the weight pressing down on me. The radio hissed again, static, then whispers, faint, almost indistinct, but unmistakably there. My name, repeated over and over, joined by a rhythm I had known before. Digging, movement, presence. I realized then that this was no ordinary grave. No human had dug it. No living force had prepared this, yet here it was, waiting, patient, eternal. And I knew, deep in my bones, that it hadn't waited for me to notice. It had been ready, always, for me. I stumbled out of the cruiser, boots, sinking slightly into wet gravel, mist curling around my legs like fingers. I tried to step toward the grave, some mixture of fear and compulsion pulling me forward. Every instinct screamed to run, to leave, to escape. But my legs moved of their own accord. The air smelled of earth, heavy, damp, ancient. Each step toward. The grave was like sinking deeper into some unseen weight, a pressure that pressed on my chest, made my lungs ache. And then I saw them again. Figures at the edges of the fog, silent, patient, waiting, watching. The watchers, always at the periphery, guiding the fog, shaping it, letting me see what I needed to see. Or perhaps what it wanted me to see. I reached the headstone, my name carved into it, bold and deliberate, letters glowing faintly in the fog's unnatural light. I knelt, hand brushing the damp stone, fingers tracing the letters as if to reassure myself that this was real, that it was somehow ordinary. But ordinary was dead. Ordinary had no meaning here. The soil in front of the grave shifted, subtle at first, then unmistakable. A mound rising, moving, as if something beneath it breathed, moved, waited. My stomach churned. The whisper of my name came again from the radio, now louder, more insistent, pressing directly into my skull. I tried to step back, tried to turn, but the ground beneath my boots seemed to grow heavier, thickening like the fog itself had rooted me to this place. The mound in front of me continued to rise, soil spilling over slowly, deliberately, as though the earth itself wanted me to witness this. And then I understood. The watchers were everywhere, not just the shadows at the fog's edge, not just the vague forms I had glimpsed. The cemetery itself, the earth, the fog, the graves, they were all watching, waiting, patient, eternal. And this grave, my grave, was their gift, or perhaps their demand. I sank to my knees, heart hammering, mind struggling to make sense. Everything I had known, Everything I had lived for, every patrol, every late night, every grave I had walked past, led me here. To this moment, to this name carved in stone, to the earth waiting beneath it, ready to receive me. The radio hissed, static thick and oppressive, then the whispers coalesced into words I couldn't ignore. "It is time," I wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but the ground had other plans. Soil shifted beneath my knees, cold, wet, unyielding. My hands sank into it as though pulled by invisible force. I tried to stand, couldn't. My boots stuck. My legs refused to obey. The fog thickened, curling around my chest, pressing into my face, damp and choking. And the watchers, silent, patient, eternal, stepped closer. Or perhaps they had never moved. Perhaps I had. My mind wavered. The fog shaped them, erased them, multiplied them. Shapes taller than men, features vague and impossible, forms that bent light and shadow in ways that made the world itself seem unreal. I sank lower, face close to the mound, soil cold against my cheek. My name whispered again through the radio, over and over rhythmically, a pulse that matched my heart, matched the movement of the earth, matched the silent intent of the watchers. I understood then that this was the end of my shift. Not a shift of hours, or patrols, or crimes solved, but the end. The end of my life as I knew it. The end of my understanding of the world. The end of everything I had held on to. The grave had been ready, always. Waiting. Patient. And I had been called. I felt the soil move beneath my palms. I felt it press upward, demanding, insistent. I felt the fog coil around me, tighter, heavier, as though the night itself had wrapped me in its arms. The watchers were silent, waiting, eternal, indifferent to my fear, my struggle, my humanity. And then a final thought, cold and absolute, passed through my mind. I had been late, always behind the shift, but they had waited, always, patient, eternal, watching. The soil began to rise, slowly, inexorably, covering my knees, pressing against my chest. My arms sank into it as well, cold, wet, unyielding. I wanted to scream, but my mouth was full of earth. The whispers pressed through the radio, my name repeated over and over, fading into silence. And I understood. I was not alone. Never alone. Never had been. The watchers, patient and eternal, had always been here. And now, finally, I was part of it. The last sound I heard before everything went silent was my own heartbeat. Slow, fading, matched by the rhythm of the earth, the fog, the cemetery itself. Patient, eternal, watching. I was buried, and the grave waited for the next shift.